Tim, how are you, brother?
Oh, good. Thanks, Chris. Lovely to be here, mate. Yeah, lovely.
Yes. Now we've got to pretend like we haven't been talking for the last hour.
You've ruined everything.
Our secret is out.
Yeah, exactly.
My gosh. Well, again, I'm so lucky doing what I do, Tim. You know, I really get to chat, not just to the most fascinating people on the planet, but all the people that, if I have my choice in life, who am I going to chat to today? It's going to be people like yourself. So thank you so much for coming and sharing your wisdom and your experience. Fighter pilot, how did that come about?
You know, it's interesting because I was actually a bomber pilot. Now, when you say you're a bomber pilot to a civilian community, of course, they don't understand what that is because they've seen Top Gun and, you know, I get it. But I was a Tornado GR4 pilot, which is the aircraft you can see just on the back over here, there. And that happened because, as I think we said previously, before we came on air here, father was in the military, father's father. So I ended up going into the military. I lived in Portsmouth. It was a naval town. I went through the traditional things of Cubs, Air Cadets. I went to university, Officer Training Corps, which was obviously an army-based organization for people at university. And then I came out of that and I joined the Navy to fly. The reason I joined the Navy and not the Air Force to fly was because I had people within the University Air Squadron. I was in the Officer Training Corps, and I came from a naval background, and I just liked the idea of naval aviation. It just so happened that after 5 years of training, the Sea Harrier that I was due to go on and fly, because I was streamed onto military fast jets, that was decommissioned back in about 2003. And there were about 9 of us at the time in Royal Air Force flying training, which all the 3 services go through training that's provided by the Royal Air Force. That's what they do. And the Royal Air Force turned around and said, well, look, you guys haven't got a job anymore, or you've got to go and start flying helicopters and go back to the beginning of your training. Do you want to come across to us and we'll put you on a Royal Air Force fast jet? So we did. But yeah, it's strange how we end up in these things, isn't it, really?
God, so you started in the Navy and ended up in the RAF.
That's right, yeah.
And for anyone with a love of flying, that's just an easy decision to make, isn't it? It's more about the love of flying than what uniform you're wearing, right?
Well, I would have stayed. I look back on the Navy now. I follow the Navy closely on social media. I really like what the Navy does with social media. I like the Navy does what the Navy does with its people as well, which is different to what the Royal Air Force does with its people and how it communicates to them. The person that took me across from the Navy to the Air Force was a guy called Mike Wigston. Now, Mike Wigston now is the Chief of Air Staff. He's the most senior guy in the Royal Air Force at the moment. And it just so happened that he was the squadron leader at the time. I was a young flight lieutenant. He phones me up. He says, Tim, the Sea Harrier is gone. You've got nothing to fly. The Navy are going to put all 9 of you back through helicopter training. It's going to take you another 3 years. I can give you a jet in the Air Force if you want to come across. Let me know by the end of the week. So we did. We said, well, that's great. And then the thing is then, Chris, I went to Lossiemouth because I asked to go and fly Tornadoes. And I ended up being on his squadron. He ended up being a squadron commander, having just brought me across, and ended up going on to 12 Squadron. And so the Chief of Air Staff was my boss for a good couple of years, a very good man, actually. And I went out to Iraq underneath him, in fact. So, but yeah, I'm a big fan of the Navy, massive fan of the Navy, always have been. Royal Marines as well also, which is one of the reasons I agreed to come on your podcast here, because I knew what kind of guy you were going to be. And I knew you're going to be an honest and straight talking guy, which you are, of course. And so I'm a huge fan of the naval service. Yeah, I follow the First Sea Lord, all those guys on social. I'm a big fan of them. Yeah.
Let's go back then, because I don't know if you're aware, but I'm a pilot.
Yes, I am aware. I am aware. Yeah.
I bandy that one around a lot.
You got to. Yeah.
Whatever. I dine out on that one, I should say.
Brilliant.
No, but seriously, I did my test in America. So the license, if you do it in America under the Federal Aviation Authority, as opposed to the
CAA,
Civil Aviation Authority in the UK, is that my license is for life. So I don't have to like resit the test if I haven't flown for 3 years or whatever the regulations are now. Somebody feel free to put that in the comments.
Yeah.
So yes, if I went to, say, America next week, I just show my license at a flight school. say, could I take that plane? They'll say, yeah, could you do a check test with us so we can see that you remember, you know, you know the protocol and you're safe. And then I can go flying for a week, right? So from that aspect, I'm interested to know, when did you first step in a plane? What was that evolution?
So I was lucky back in the day when the Air Cadets were doing a lot more flying than they are now. It was called the Air Training Corps back then. I joined when I was about 13 years old, and my first flying was in Chipmunks, which the little de Havilland Chipmunk with the cartridge starter. And that's how we all learned to fly, is we sat in the back of this thing and moved things around, and it was all very noisy and everything smelled of fuel, you know, and you become sensitized to it, you understand it, and it becomes a thing. And as the ground falls away, as you well know, you're like, oh, and some people get that and some people don't. But I've flown many people in jets who really haven't flown in jets before, and they've been unaroused by it. I get it, it's fine. But for me, every time I got airborne, obviously we're working hard in the jets, and normally getting airborne is a formation or something. But I remember whenever I used to fly in the little aircraft that, you know, you fly, and I still fly now, the ground falling away, it's always that kind of experience, isn't it? Of, oh, we're flying, it's something magical. So we did a lot of gliding. I did a gliding thing. I went solo in a glider when I was 15, I think it was. And then I applied for a Royal Air Force flying scholarship, which I didn't get. But I got, I applied for a sixth form scholarship. Sorry, I got the flying scholarship, which was 30 hours. And I flew at a place called Kidlington on a PA-28 Warrior, little Piper. And I did 30 hours in that. And that was really my formalized approach to flying. But one thing I do talk to young people about, Chris, is people that want to get into aviation. I say, look, this can be free. It doesn't have to cost you. What you need to do is you need to go to a flight school. This is what I did when I was young. There was a flight school in Chichester. I used to cycle there on my bike. And what I did is I washed their aircraft without them even realizing it for 3 months. I took my own buckets and my sponges and got some water there. And I'd go up to the airplanes at the beginning of the day that were just being wheeled out the hangar, and I start washing them. And everyone thought I worked for the company. I'd never spoken to anyone in the company at all. I was about 14 years old, and I washed all the aircraft and I dried them. And a pilot would come out and he'd say, oh, thanks so much. I'll bring it back. And if you could just do that one over there. Oh yeah, of course I will. And I'd do that one as well. I did this without speaking to anyone, like in the management, for about 3 months before someone came out and they said, who pays you for doing this? And I said, no one pays me. And they said, well, what are you doing cleaning our airplane? I said, well, I'm hoping that one day you'll say that I can go flying with you. And they said, you can go flying right now. And from then on, I'd wash their aircraft and they'd fly me at the end of the day, and I'd fly for an hour. And that's how I kind of learned before I even had, you know, before any military stuff. I was with the Air Training Corps, but I did that. And that's what I tell people. It's like that for me was like an internship, if you see what I mean. You
do realise when they make your Hollywood blockbuster, Tim, that is going to be the most brilliant start to a film.
Just washing. I used to cycle there on my bike along the lanes with this bucket. And it used to take me like 45 minutes or almost an hour. And this bucket and a sponge and all this kind of stuff in this thing. I cycle. Yeah, I used to love that. That's getting hands on aircraft. You know, I think a lot of people don't, it's not a physical thing anymore. You just get into an airplane, you go on holiday. But when you are washing, it's like when you wash your car, you see the dents and you know what I mean? You think, oh, that bit's getting a bit rusty. If you go through a car wash, you don't get that. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. That's, you know, the magical summers back when I was like 14. So that's how I kind of got into it.
My parallel experience is I washed cars to buy a Swiss Army knife.
Oh, that's excellent. Seriously, did you really?
I saw this black Swiss Army knife, and I've always loved knives, right? I had my first knife when I was about 5. My grandmother bought me. My son, he had his first pocket knife when he was 1. So now that he's 5, he's moved on to the axe now, right?
Obviously.
I know. We all, but so when I first saw a Swiss Army knife, and I think I had my first red one, and then I realized you can get black ones, which just look so cool. And there was one in the window of our petrol station, right? So that was it. Out with a bucket and a sponge, door to door. Excuse me, would you like your car washed? No sales tactics, just I'm 7 years old or whatever. Oh, Sonny, yeah, it's over there. And I probably left those cars in more of a shit state than they actually were when. but these people were kind enough to give me 50p a car, and the knife was about £5 pounds or something. So eventually I got that knife.
That's brilliant.
So did you ever fly solo in the Chipmunk, Tim?
No.
No, that was all just cadet stuff.
Yeah, that was all cadet stuff. They're flying now more than they were now. The cadets. I do a lot of talking at cadet units. I try and not do as much anymore because it takes up so much time. I'm sure you probably get this as well. Unfortunately, I've had another offer for a Glasgow squadron recently. I might have turned it down, but they do fly more now. Back then, though, you didn't solo in the Chipmunk as a cadet. You were flown aerobatics, all that kind of stuff. And it was mainly gliding we did, but now the cadets use the Grob Tutor. I don't think they solo as cadets either anymore. Am I right in thinking that? They do on the air squadron, of course, but not as
I should just point out, I don't fly, Tim, just for the record. I'm one of these people, I love to make my dreams come true. I just love it. And I wanted to be I don't even know if I wanted to be a pilot, but I wanted to fly. And if you're going to fly, well, getting your PPL, your private, that's kind of a nice marker. You know, that means you've done the basics and you can fly an aircraft on your own. So that's what I did. When I came back to the UK and realized the extortionate cost of
it's ridiculous. It's awful.
You know, I've never really earned, other than when I was a substance misuse specialist, I've never earned more than like £10,000 a year. Yeah. Even honestly, to this day, that's been the case. It's obviously going to change now that I've started my YouTube channel. The reason I'm saying this is for people watching. I've achieved all of my dreams, everything I've ever wanted to do, less than £10,000 a year, bar being a substance misuse specialist. They paid me 27 grand a year, and I spent that on learning to dry suit dive so I could go on an expedition to Antarctica, right? Anyway, I'm digressing. The thing was, I didn't have a massive, I would like to have come back to the UK and flown. Of course I would, because it's a great experience, but I wasn't going to pay, 150 quid for 40 minutes or whatever it to me, until I got comfy in life, that would just be extravagant. Sorry, I digress. So how many hours did you fly before you went solo?
I've got the logbooks over there, actually, Chris. I think over here somewhere.
Just roughly, because I think for me it was about, I think I did 15 hours or something.
Yeah, that figure, 10 to 12, is normally the standard. I don't fly now, by the way. I will. There's an airfield 20 minutes walk from my house. I live in Ledbury, as a grass strip. So my wife and I will eventually, when we're rich and famous, obviously when our YouTube channels kick off, Chris, because that's going to happen. But I will try and fly out that grass strip. But for me, it's too expensive at the moment, and also there's nothing to do in British civilian aviation at the moment. You literally, from what I can gather, I speak to a lot of pilots, a lot of private pilots. They go and hire an airplane. A friend of mine is called Plain Old Ben Cornwell. He's got a channel on YouTube. He picks up an airplane, flies it to somewhere, has a very expensive lunch, the most expensive hamburger you've ever eaten in your life, flies it back, does some filming in the jet, and I call it a jet, in the airplane, sorry. And then he lands and he says, well, that's 500 quid I'm never going to see again. And for me, I used to get it. I remember I've got friends on the F-18 out in the States, and one of the guys out there, the reason I'm talking about this is because I'll tell you why I'm not flying in the UK. He will be given an F-18 sometimes, and they say, go and do some stuff. And he's like, what do I do? What am I going to do with a single F-18 Hornet by myself? It's the truth, isn't it? It's like, I can't even do air combat. I've got no one to fight against. It's like the most tedious thing in the world. So for me, until I get a purpose with aviation, I'm not gonna fly. So, and it probably is, Chris, isn't it? It's putting a camera in that airplane, flying around and having these kind of conversations with someone, isn't it?
Oh, the limit, there's loads of possibilities now. What with the way media is going, I certainly would consider going back to the States for a flying holiday.
Yeah, and
it would be reasonable. I mean, for less than, let's say, £2,000, you'd probably get your fill of flying. I would consider that. It's a funny thing, isn't it? In the States, they have aeroplanes like we would have a car.
That's right.
Not everybody, obviously, but the ranch owners and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
and we had these things called, we had to watch out for NORADs.
Okay.
That was these kind of hillbillies that they didn't even have a radio in their plane. You know, they literally just get up to go to their friend's ranch 30 miles over there. They didn't radio. They had their own runway in
the house. Yeah.
On their property, and they'd hop in their single engine Cessna up. They'd go over to their friend's ranch and come back, and they wouldn't even tell ground control or air traffic control that they were going up, right?
Crazy. And
that's why you had to watch out for these NORADs. But it was an interesting scenario. But yeah, I'd do it again when I get the money. I'd consider it. I'm not too bothered. The same as I didn't go. I thought about remortgaging my house and doing the commercial license. But then, do you know what I honestly thought? I thought, I don't want to sit in a cockpit for like 8 hours doing nothing.
That's why I don't do it. Yeah.
Except pushing buttons on the computer.
That's why I don't do it.
Would be a wasted life.
And I've got many friends doing that. My brother does it. My brother is a pilot with Emirates on the 777. So he's got one of the biggest aircraft you can fly. He flies that. You know, he loves the lifestyle. He's a great guy. He's very social. But no, he flies to Thailand. Like he does 11-hour trips, stays 2 nights, comes back again. And that's not me. The worst bit for me going on holiday is being in that tube. You know, the airport is the worst bit. If I could, I'm a traveling fan. My wife and I, we do travel. If I can just be in the middle of Berlin, I'm a happy man. You know, if I've got to fly, if I've got to go to Heathrow or Manchester or Birmingham, go through the airport. I mean, what is security going to be like now? Geez, it's going to be horrendous. And then I've got to go through all that, kind of sit by the gate, get into the plane, sit there next to, read something, get off, do the same thing in reverse, then be in the middle of Berlin. I'm like, I'd rather drive, Chris, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I should clarify, I mean absolutely no offense to pilots who love what they do, and I get it. Some people love the technical aspect that you're here and you're via this computer, you're controlling, it's all system based now. It's not so much of the, chopped away, Ginger, I'm going to land this baby. It's the commercial airlines, obviously much more system based, computer system. And I got a friend, he just loves that,
Yeah.
He went into flying, not because he liked to fly, but because he liked to do this, to push
the management. Yeah.
The management, right? So, I mean, no offense to people that love flying. Great. I really envy you. But for me, I thought, hang on, that's 11 hours in a cockpit that I could be like traveling around the world and exploring and getting like a variety of experiences. And so
I'm the same. Yeah, I'm the same.
Do you remember, can you tell us, Tim, what it was like the first time you flew solo?
Well, actually, I do actually. I'm trying to think whether this is the first time. The first time would have been a couple of circuits. The first memory I have of being in an airplane by myself, it is on that flying scholarship for the Air Force with a company called Oxford Aviation Training, I think, down in Kiddington, down in Oxfordshire. The first memory I have is doing you do like a triangle, don't you? You have to go, like a little navigation exercise. And I remember approaching some weather, and when the ground comes up and the weather comes down, and it's that kind of whole steamroller coming towards you. Like, no, it's like it's going to take me 4 days to get there. You know what I mean? But it's still like, no weather. And thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And actually kind of reaching the weather and still being beneath it and going, oh, there's clouds. I don't want to go near because I haven't got an instrument rating. I can't go in the weather. I'm like, oh. And then finish on my Navex and come back thinking, oh, I survived that. And I remember from that day on thinking, you've got to prepare for these events before you get in the airplane. And that's something that I do in life now, by the way, is I'm a big, and it's a problem. I always think in advance, like what if happens. And that comes from that first event, really, that I remember being in an airplane of coming up against something I hadn't really considered before.
It can be terrifying.
Oh yeah.
You don't want to get caught in cloud, because if you can't see and you've not got an instrument range, so you don't have the instruments to get you down safely. I took off once and I left it too late to leave this airfield. By the time I got up to altitude, it was dark, and I was just I was just a student. And then the fear that came over me of, what do I do? Do I go back to that airfield and land and just sleep in the airplane? I'm not supposed to be flying, right? And God, I put on every bloody light I could find on that plane. I'll tell you, I would have put the Christmas lights on if I could have found a switch, right?
Yeah.
And I tentatively radioed through to air traffic control and said, I didn't tell them I was a student. I just went, I can't remember my call sign, but like November 50 Bravo, right? And went, sure, November 50 Bravo, if you can take bearing, and go into a holding pattern. And I was like, right, yeah, roger, affirmative. I thought, he's letting me come in. He's letting me come in. I had to fly about 12 miles back to the main, you know, where the flight was.
Yeah.
And as I came up, he came over the air again. Right, 50 Bravo. No, make that a straight on approach. Your traffic is cleared. That meant traffic for people listening is they give you traffic, and you've got to see where this traffic is, because it could be bloody Concorde or something, right? It could be a 747. It could be a fighter jet. It could be anything. You've got to be able to see it before you come into land, because obviously, if you don't, that's when accidents can happen. And so I'm looking out for the traffic, and apparently it's already landed. And he gave me a straight on approach, which meant I can just come straight in and down the runway. And on the rural runways, you click your mic button, I think it's 12 times, and the lights just come on like something out of Star Wars all down the runway.
It's weird, isn't it?
It's amazing. This one, because it's a main airfield, it's Fort Pierce, I think it is. The lights are always on, but you're coming down a runway that's designed for, you know, commercial aircraft, and you're just in a little Cessna. It's just a brilliant feeling to land in the dark with all the lights. And then this very nice man on the radio, I think in the nighttime, the ground control all went home. So it's just this guy then directed me to my, to the apron, you know, where you park the plane. I can't even remember the terminology.
Yeah, it's an apron, isn't it? Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, I know that feeling of fear. You've got to get it right. There's no second chance in a plane, is there?
No, and to be honest, I don't think I was ever, because anxiety is a big thing when you're not only learning to fly, but of course, in the military aviation, it never stops because there's always another workup. It's like the same thing with the Marines. If you do the mountain leaders course or you went special boats or something, there's always another thing that you can mess up, you can potentially fail, or it can injure you. You know, and on the front line, there's always that. And on flying training, there is always that, especially for instructors as well. There's always instructor upgrades. So you're never comfortable in role. And it's probably quite a good thing, because if you were comfortable, you could be complacent as well, Chris. And you don't want to be complacent in an airplane. So there is always that next thing going on. It was only towards the very end of my flying career, after about 20 years, where I started to get under aroused. I've always been a low arousal pilot anyway. And I started to get very under aroused. And I started to realize, look, you've done this too long now. You're going to need to take a ground tour, which is why I went to Afghanistan, by the way, in 2011. Because of that, I went, take me out, you know, give me a ground tour. And the Air Force went, well, go to Afghanistan instead. And I was like, brilliant, thanks for that. But that's what they do, isn't it? And then I came back and carried on flying, and that kept me going for another few years, until eventually when I did leave, I remember thinking, this is the right time. This is the right time to get out of this.
So let's talk through your career then, Tim, if that's okay. When did you do your test? Was that on this sort of, did you call it a scholarship?
Yeah, so it's a flying scholarship, is available to anyone. I'm pretty sure the Air Force still do it now. I think it's 20 hours now. It's not, there's not many of them. It's a way of introducing the people to flying. And majority of those people don't join the military, and it's fine, because it's about industry leaders being sympathetic to the military and things like that. And of course, people that, you know, might run BP or Shell or something will turn around and go, I did a flying scholarship with the Air Force, and here's some Air Force guy asking for a job. Yeah, come and have an interview. That's what that kind of thing's for. But I ended up going to university. I did very badly academically, Chris. I don't know whether you realise. I did my GCSEs. They went fine. And then I changed school into a college down the road. It's a whole new environment, trying to fit in, ego, all that kind of stuff. And I got 2 E's and an N in my A-levels. So I did really badly, which meant either resitting my A-levels. I got into some smoking drugs when I was, you know, that kind of stuff you do when you're a kid. And then resit the A-levels, or go and do another qualification somewhere else. So I took the opportunity to go to what was the University of West of England. It used to be a polytechnic, of course, and I did an HND in engineering. And then that led to a degree in engineering. And then I managed to get into the Navy. So I joined the Navy back in '98. That's Dartmouth up there, by the way. Britannia Royal Naval College, Dartmouth, which you may have been to. I went to Lympstone when I was in. I don't know if they went to Dartmouth. Some Marines did come up to Dartmouth for a language course when I was there. We just went to the pub and got smashed up, which is very traditional, isn't it, when you get bootnecks come up. What should we do? Just go to a pub and get smashed. Yeah.
That's kind of the only thing we did in the Marines.
Yeah, exactly. That's it, isn't it? It's like, that's the language we all spoke, wasn't it? You know, Royal Marines and naval officers come together, and yeah, we all speak the same language, which was alcohol and girls probably at the time. So I went to Dartmouth for about 6 months, I think it was almost a year with fleet time. And then we started flying training, which was on the Slingsby Firefly at Berkshire Heath. It's a yellow aeroplane piston engine. And from that, the weirdest thing about that is the reason I ended up getting Stream Jets is because I asked for it. It wasn't necessarily any kind of talent. It's just because I went up to the senior Navy guy and said, "Can I fly Sea Harriers, please?" And he went, "Yeah, no one else seems to want to. Everyone seems to want to fly helicopters. So, yeah, why not?" Isn't that weird? And of course, the way it works in the military is...
I can't ask him tomorrow, can I?
Yeah, sure you can.
Have you got his phone number?
I'll give him a call. That's it. I've got this guy, Chris. Yeah, he wants to fly. Yeah. You wouldn't want to do it, Chris. I tell you, you wouldn't want to do it. It's a hell of a stressful process going through flying training, especially going through flying training on jets, because it takes the young people 7 years now. The Air Force messed it up. The Ministry of Defence bought into a contract to privatise flying training. It was a poor contract. UKMFTS, United Kingdom Military Flying Training System. It's getting better now because it's halfway through a 25-year contract. Privatised it, and it takes 7 years to get guys through fast jet flying training. And who wants to do that? Most guys join the mid-20s. So now you're in your early 30s, starting a family, and you still haven't finished flying training yet. It's awful. So I advise people to look at rotary or multi-engine. It takes less time, and it tends to be a bit easier. I hate to say it, it just is. It's just a bit easier to get through. Jet training is long. It's quite hard, especially towards the back end, just is what it is. But then I went from the Firefly onto the Tucano, which is a turboprop aircraft at Linton-on-Ouse, with the Navy still. And then from there, I went to RAF Valley, and I trained on 2 squadrons that ended up being on as an instructor in the end, 208 Squadron, which was advanced flying training on the Hawk T1 that the Red Arrows use. And then you do weapons training on the Hawk T1, but on a squadron called 19 Squadron. And then after that is when I transferred to the Navy and transferred to the Air Force and ended up on the Tornado Squadron, 12 Squadron up at Lossiemouth. We had 7 squadrons of Tornadoes. And from that, after 4 years, a couple of tours of Iraq, 4 or 5 years, I went back to Valley, and I stayed at Valley for the next decade, which I'm not saying is the best thing to do, but it just kind of worked out that way. I'd rather have gone back to Tornado, but back on the 208 Squadron as an instructor, and then into Afghanistan for 6 months with the US Army. And that was...
for us novices, that's probably not the right word, but what's it like then when you climb in a Tornado for the first time? What's it like to fly a jet for the first time? A jet, I'm guessing a jet is a turbine engine as opposed to a piston engine. Is that right?
Yeah, or turboprop. Turboprop, obviously by the name, has a prop on the front. I mean, a jet, that's still a jet engine. A jet, like people would see the Red Arrows, that's a jet aircraft. And the Red Arrows is the Hawk T1, made in 1970, early 1974 roughly. It's quite a dated aircraft, and that's the one that students used to all go on to. That's the first jet I flew, was a Hawk. And it's very much it's all you know at the time. The dials, if you're familiar with like an MG Midget or an MG BGT, or you get in this thing, it's got Bakelite dials. My wife eventually flew in one as well. One of my pilots on the squadron, we used to fly spouses, and she managed to get a flight in the back seat of a Hawk, and she got in and she was like, "Oh, this is like my MG Midget." She's got a red MG Midget at home here. She's like, "Oh, Bakelite dials seem to be the same," and of course they're the same. It was made at the same time. You know what I mean?
Do you want to just explain to him what an MG Midget is? Because I don't.
MG Midget, yeah, you're international now, aren't you? You're all over the world.
Well, it's not just that. It's just that they were in my youth, so I doubt anyone now knows what they are.
That is valid. Okay, so it is a car that was manufactured in the 60s. It's a very small, lightweight sports car, soft top, 2 seats. And if you think of like an MX-5, a Mazda MX-5, it's like a mini version, one of those. But it's very old, so all the dials in it are, made of what's called Bakelite, which is a kind of an old form of, I suppose, what you'd look at as plastic in the olden days. And the Hawk T1 was made during the era. So it is a very analog cockpit is what we would call it. The Hawk T2, which of course came after the T1, and I was an instructor on that aircraft, is a very futuristic cockpit with a lot of TV screens and head-up displays and everything else. And that's what I ended up teaching students on. But the first time you get into a Hawk or into a jet by yourself, remember, you're not really aware anyway, because the instructor is always behind you when you're a student, because it's a tandem cockpit. So you crew in, you do your checks and everything. The first thing, I'll tell you what kind of puts it to you, Chris, is when you walk out to the jet, there's no instructor there. You've got to fit a seat cover, a seat apron over the ejection seat, because the ejection seat has harnesses and things that can snag the controls. So they have to be dragged into the middle, all attached, all tucked away. And then this apron goes over the ejection seat and you fasten it in. And doing that, you're like, there's no one else in this airplane. And then you get in, and of course, you can't really turn around to see them. It's hard because the ejection seat's behind you, but there's no one to talk to. It's quite lonely in that respect. And there's no one, of course, to check that what you're doing is correct. And in the later years, I used to send these students solo, of course, and instructors that came back from other aircraft like Typhoon and Harry and all sorts. You know, you put them in the Hawk and you say, off you go and have a play. And because you can empathize with them, because you've done it yourself, you can say to these students, look, you're going to have these feelings, because you have to brief them. It takes about an hour. You know, they've done about 15 hours or 13 hours on the Hawk T2 they did before they went solo, 13 hours. And then the solo really is go off in the area, do some aerobatics, do some, there's a general handling package we practice, such as stalls and things like that. And you say to them, you're going to, you know, all these things are going to happen. You're going to feel a bit lonely. You can't talk to anyone, but there is someone in the control tower. And that person is there on a separate frequency. Anything goes wrong, normally it was me, you can dial me up, and then we'll have a chat. And some of these students would call me up and they'd say, I've pressed the button, and in the head-up display, there's some writing, and I don't know how to get rid of it. And you say, okay, what does it say? It's like, it's a big circle, and there's some writing underneath it that says like AMRAAM or something. It's like, okay, you've selected an air-to-air missile mode. What we need to do is bring you out of that missile mode so you can come back and land the airplane. They're like, how do I do that? It's very easy to do, Chris, because you can knock a switch on the stick. And of course, the first thing you do with an airplane is you don't learn to fight it, you learn to fly it. So all these modes would come at the end of the course. All the weaponeering would come at the very end. You know, it's like being a Marine, isn't it? You do all the phys first, and eventually you get into weapons and everything else, and mortars and everything else comes later. The same thing with flying. So of course they do 13 trips of learning how to stall and land and take off and doing circuits, and then of course they get up there, press the wrong button, and all of a sudden it comes up with, you know, some massive radar screen and some weapons and guns and things. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. But yeah, so it's a bit lonely, I'd say, and it's a bit lonely, and it's the weather's always really good for your first solo, but when you get down is when you really appreciate what's happened, because no one's ever going to take that away from you. And that's what I tell people when they come back from their first solo. I grab them, literally, I used to grab them by the arm and say, you've just flown a jet by yourself and no one else in that airplane. No one, doesn't matter whether I chop you tomorrow. Chop is when we fail people. We call it the chop, like chop. Even if you fail tomorrow, it doesn't matter. You've flown a jet for the rest of your life now. You know, you've got those wings on your chest. You know, you have flown a jet solo. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. Some of these people are very young. I'm telling you now, some of them are 19, 20 years old, and we give them a 28 million pound airplane, and we hope they bring it back. And so far they have all brought it back.
At what stage in this process do you go, do you know what, I'm going to go and do a loop-the-loop, or I'm going to fly upside down? How does that come about?
So go through flying training and get through packages. So the first package you go through is a general handling package. And within that general handling will be an aerobatics sortie flight where you're taught aerobatics. Remember, there's a lot of simulator work as well. So you're in the simulator a lot, almost half the amount that you're in the airplane, really. So or equal amount you're in the airplane. And then you do an instrument flying bit, then you do a formation bit, then you do a tactical formation bit, and then you go into combat. And so I think by trip 5 or 6, you're doing aerobatics, and the aerobatics is there for a purpose. It's to understand the dynamics of the airplane. So you're max performing the airplane. It's like taking your car and putting it on a skid pan, or taking it around a racetrack. So normally you never take the car to that limit, but you need to know how it handles in case it does that. So we very quickly take the students into max performing the aircraft. We call it max performance maneuvers now. We don't call it aerobatics anymore, but it is flying the aircraft to the limits it can be flown. But there were a lot of pilots I flew with that would always go upside down every single sortie. They'd be like, there's no point us being a jet pilot unless we can go upside down, because it's something that helicopter pilots and multi-engine pilots can't do. I couldn't be bothered. All you got to do is roll. I just thought, whatever, I can't. But they've come back to the airfield and go upside down, and for them it was a big thing, and that's cool. That's
We're going to come on to this later on, but do you know the Top Gun music has just started playing in my head when you said they come back to the airfield and they go upside down. Down, 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 down.
That film did more damage to. No, it's
all right.
yeah,
Well, let's talk about that now then, and then I've got a million more questions we can come back to. So, Top Gun. Tell us, what was that realistic? What damage did it do?
There's a lot of stories, actually. There's I think a 3-part story on YouTube about the making of Top Gun, which I would recommend people go and watch if they're interested in why some of the scenes in Top Gun are in Top Gun, such as why they're flying through the mountains whilst they're doing air combat and things like that. So Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer, there was a naval, a guy from the US Navy, and he was a pilot, and he was there to feed them information and say, this is what we would do. Now, of course, in filmmaking, a lot of flying, Chris, is routine, and it's tedious, and it's boring, and you would make a rubbish film. Okay, it would make a rubbish film. My wife always used to say, it's the most unglamorous job you could ever have. I used to wear like these undergarments, like long johns, and I used to wear, it's like, I know Royal Marines, they never used to wear underwear, but we used to have to wear underwear, we used to have to, so you're wearing 3 or 4 layers, and then you're wearing a rubber suit and a knitted suit and a rubber suit to protect you from the water, and then you're walking out to the airplane. It's not a glamorous thing. Top Gun comes out, of course, back in 1986. I was 12 at the time. And of course, it makes it look very glamorous. And what it did is it sucked a load of us into 20 years worth of flying career. And then, of course, we realized very quickly that it's not a glamorous career at all. So Top Gun, obviously a lot of things happen in Top Gun. And I think what I might do, Chris, is maybe one of those react videos to Top Gun where I talk about it and see if people are interested in that. But there are a lot of things in Top Gun that wouldn't happen in the real world, of course. But I'll be honest with you, as a recruitment tool for the US Navy, it did absolute wonders. It was, it did absolutely, and of course, before that came out, Top Gun came out, I believe, in May 1986. In January, I think 25th of January or something, Iron Eagle came out. And I'm an Iron Eagle fan because I like Dougie Masters and Chappie Sinclair. And this was a story about a young kid, strangely like me, who wasn't doing very well academically. His father was in the military. He wanted to fly airplanes, broken home, that kind of stuff. And eventually he manages to get into the Air Force in a kind of a back route and end up flying F-16s and rescuing his dad. And it's the whole, I know you've seen it at all, but.
Well, I want to come back to that because I'm going to ask you about Officer and a Gentleman, which is another classic film.
God.
But as far as the Top Gun's concerned, let's list for our audience then what is wrong about that film. I said to you earlier, you wouldn't buzz the tower, which is fly so low that here's the control tower, and boom, you fly over it and give everyone in the tower the fright of their life, because you'd probably just lose your flying career right there and then.
Yeah, you wouldn't fly again. Yeah, you wouldn't fly again. And you wouldn't be doing it whilst you're on a specialist training course, like Pete Mitchell was, of course. I mean, that's the thing about Top Gun. Top Gun got the spirit of flying right. I think that's why it was so attractive to aviators around the world and to young people that looked in the sky and went, oh, I wouldn't mind doing that. So it got the cavalier nature of the pilot correct. Pilots are mavericks. That's the whole point. Pilots aren't conformist in any way, shape or form. I mean, what's conformist about wanting to break away from the ground? Literally, I want to leave this thing that I'm in right now with all these people and I want to go somewhere else. That in itself is non-conformist. That in itself is a rebel. It's a maverick. It's someone that doesn't want to conform to the status quo. So Top Gun did that very well. And in naming the lead character, Maverick, I think that was one of their sort of genius traits, because of course, every pilot I've ever met is very similar to that. no pilot's going to listen to anyone or take orders. You don't do it. We do things because it's the right way of doing things. And that's why, you know how it is in the military. People rarely give orders in the military. It's just, guys, this is the commander's intent. He wants us to go and take this hill. Everyone happy? Yeah, let's go and take the hill. I'm not ordering you to take a hill. I'm going to go that way and take a hill. You're going to come with me? Of course you are, because we're a band of brothers and that's what we do. And we want to go and, do what we're supposed to do. So things in Top Gun that they didn't get right. Yeah. Buzzing that tower, going back up and picking up your wingman because he's not landing on the carrier. All those kind of things.
We need to break this down or people will be like, what the hell are these guys going on about?
Right.
It's the bit where his mate was up there and he was too scared to bring it down on the undulating deck of the carrier.
Yeah.
And who did someone go up and talk him down? I can't remember.
So Maverick, he touched the deck, didn't he? Went up again and talked him down and said, anyone seen a carrier around here? And talked him down onto the deck. There is someone that does that. There is someone on the carrier that gets on the radio and chats to people and talks them down as a landing signal officer and all these kind of people.
Not the guy from the NAFI, is it?
No, not that guy. That'd be a pretty good guy to do it. So then they go. So the air combat again. All the air combat scenes, I think they've been debunked pretty much. That's not air combat. Is again happens very quickly. Within about 40 seconds, someone normally dies. It's literally under a minute. And that's even if that's normally outside of visual range. Missiles are being thrown at 20, 30 miles out. People are defending against them and trying. If you do come into what's called the merge, you're in a really bad place now, because now you're tied up fighting with someone and his buddy can come in and kill you out, which is why you always fly as pairs or as fours. So there's always someone in depth to come in. So that stuff, the whole hitting the brakes, flying right by, that's never going to work for you. But then it does work for the camera. If you ever look at any of the films I put on my YouTube channel, when you see an aircraft outside, an aircraft I might be doing combat with, it's tiny weeny. And it's really hard to see and to keep people visual in the combat arena, in the visual combat arena. So in Top Gun, they had to reduce those distances right down, like literally right down, so that it actually looked good. So for real, you'd never be that close to someone. It just doesn't happen. You're normally about a range of about a mile, and the aircraft is probably about this big. The wingspan is about this big as you look at it. And I show that on my videos. But in Top Gun, of course, you have to bring those jets right in. They did a program at RAF Valley recently, and exactly the same thing happened. They tried filming from the cockpit of other aircraft, and the producers of the film, I did a bit of consultancy work on it. They said, it's not worth us filming this. You've got to bring these aircraft like literally right in. So that was done. And obviously doing air combat around mountains is something that you're not going to do. You have a hard deck, you have a base height, we call it, of 5,000 feet clear of the ground normally, or 10,000 feet, and you don't go beneath that, literally to the foot. If you go beneath it, like a foot below, then you terminate that particular engagement and you reset and you carry on.
There's a moment in that film when Goose, his co-pilot, it's not his co-pilot, it's his navigator, isn't it?
Yeah, his weapon systems officer, whatever they want to call it, yeah.
They meet the Russian jets, or the MiG. They're flying along together, and then they say they invert, so they roll over, and his navigator gets a Polaroid camera out, so an instant camera, and takes a photo. Well, I think we all know that maneuver is just never ever going to happen probably in human history. It'd be quite remarkable if traveling at that speed. What's it, 500 miles an hour or?
Yeah, something like that. The Blue Angels, the US Navy display team, do an inverted pass, I think, with the gear down, and it's very similar to that. But it's not going to happen in a combat situation. But that's the great thing about Top Gun, isn't it? I mean, how many jobs do you know that if they film the job and try to make it into a film, it would be just the most horrendous thing in the world?
What about the Polaroid team? Did pilots take cameras up there? I think
now everyone's got a phone, haven't they? So, and they gave us these flight suits, and I think the Typhoon guys in their jackets they wear can put the phone there. They always say don't take phones or switch them off. Pilots obviously don't bother because you might want to take a picture of yourself because you're looking cool, aren't you? So, they do say switch phones off on airplanes, don't they? That's rubbish. We all know it's rubbish. The pilot up front there is probably doing something on his phone. They used to affect, they reckon there could have been something that would have affected navigation equipment, but nowadays it doesn't. But everyone switches their phone off anyway, don't they? But yeah, so we carry phones in case, and that really is in case you land away. So if you hit a bird or you have a fuel issue or something, you divert into another airfield. Well, you want to be able to phone the boss up and say, look, I haven't stolen the jet, boss. You know, I've hit a bird. I've just landed in Manchester. I'm going to have to turn the jet around, do some servicing, fill it with fuel and try and bring it back. That's why you take your phone. And obviously, as I said, it's quite good for the selfie, isn't it? There should be more of that going on, more selfies going on in fast jets, but of course there isn't.
And what about the bit in Top Gun when they have to eject? I can't remember why. I can't remember.
Yeah,
why.
so it was a compressor stall, wasn't it? So flying through someone's jet wash, getting compressor stall, and then adverse yaw, which I don't. It's interesting this because the F-14 did suffer in the early days from those kind of issues, but also there was a young female pilot who was killed from an engine failure on the early models of the F-14. That rotated the jet very short of the carrier, and it turned the jet upside down, and they both ejected into the sea. Cara Holtzgreen or something. I can't remember her name, but I remember reading about it. It's a very awful accident. But insofar as getting an aircraft into a flat spin as that, which would then compress airflow over the top of the canopy and wouldn't let the canopy is rockets. And when you fire your ejection seat, the canopy rockets fire and they fire that canopy away from the seat. It's a huge piece of perspex, huge piece of material, so like 200-300 kilograms. And of course, the rear seat went into that. To get an aircraft to spin like that, I don't think you could. I don't think that is a possible emergency. I don't think that's possible to happen. The UK aircraft, we have a micro detonation cord, which you're familiar with, of course, that runs down the canopy itself, and when the seat fires, the canopy explodes. The Tornado canopy did come off. The canopy on the Tornado had rockets, and it would fire off over the tail of the aircraft, and the seats would go. The Hawk has this micro detonation cord, so the canopy explodes like a microsecond before the seat fires out. That's a difficult emergency. I don't think that would happen, but yeah, it's great TV. It's great TV.
They ended up in the water, didn't they? And the rescue helicopter came to get. I'm guessing in a training scenario, if you are near water, there's the nearest naval base or air force base has a rescue helicopter. Am I on the right?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, we had search and rescue at RAF Valley. There was always a search and rescue aircraft at RAF Valley, and if every day we'd be flying over the water at Valley because it's an island, Anglesey, and we train with that helicopter. Remember, so every year you do sea drills where you get taken out on a little boat in Holyhead, and you're in all your kit in a harness, and they drag you behind the boat. You've got to get out of your harness as if you're being dragged in a parachute, and then you inflate your life raft. It should float automatically, but we swim over to it in case it hasn't, and it's underneath the seat that we eject on, and we pull a cord and it inflates itself, and then we get into the life raft and we do it up, and then we bail it out of water, and then they leave us there for ages, by the way, because they're sadists. Mm-hmm. And eventually the helicopter comes over from RAF Valley, or it's now at Carnarvon. It's now a civilian asset. And it comes over and picks you up. And it's the scariest thing ever, because this thing hovers and there's a guy dangling on the line. And those guys, those loadmasters that come and rescue you, they're pretty swept up guys. I mean, if you mess them around, you're going to get a punch in the face, pretty much. Mm-hmm. There's a way of being picked up. And if you don't conform with that, they're going to cut things off you, literally. So they've got a huge J knife. They're coming, swinging in. The helicopter's coming in like a 10 knots. And they come and land on you. They're on the water and they land on you. You're handing them your Beckett, saying, "This, you attached to this, and this is the thing that attaches me to my life raft." They attach you to the Beckett. They cut away your life raft thing, and then they hoist you up, because they're in a very dangerous situation there. They're hovering over a sea in a helicopter, and an engine failure, single engine failure. They've got to fly away, and they're going to cut you loose. They're going to, whatever height you're at, they're going to cut everything away. They don't want to be there. So it's a scary experience. A lot of salt spray in your face, and I hated it. I hated some massive loadmaster coming and landing on me, and but you do it every year to practice it. I think it's every 2 years actually, but yeah.
You said the life raft was in the seat.
Yeah.
Do you, when you eject, my understanding, and I guess every jet is different, but my understanding is you're in the seat when you eject, mm-hmm. but then you leave the seat and it falls away. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. So it depends what height you're at. The seat's got something called a barostatic timing release unit, I think it's called. I might have got that wrong. So when the seat comes out of the airplane, it says, "Oh, I think it was above 10,000 feet." It says, "I'm above or below 10,000 feet." And if you're above 10,000 feet, the seat stays with you. And a little drogue comes out, stabilizes you, but it wants to get you below 10,000 feet because above 10,000 feet, it's kind of hard to breathe. There's not much oxygen. And then when it gets below 10,000 feet, the seat falls away. So a low-level ejection would see the seat fire out, you're in the seat, and then as the seat comes out, about a quarter of a second later, a little drogue comes out, starts pulling out a main chute, the seat falls away from you completely, and the bottom of the seat comes off, and underneath it is what we call a personal survival pack. It's a big yellow box, and that hangs down from you about 12 feet beneath you. And as that hits the water, it's salt water activated, or it's water activated, and the life raft inflates. So your jacket, you've got to inflate that yourself, or the water will inflate your life jacket. You got that on, but as you hit the water, the raft beneath you should have already inflated, and then you hit the water and you're under your harness, and then you just pull your little life raft in on the end of it, get into the life raft. It's a bit of a hassle, to be honest, and then only part of it's blown up. You've got to blow up the floor, and you've got to blow up the part around you as well. Inside that life raft, then there's also another pack which has things like an axe in it, and it has some snare wire to catching rabbits, and it has in your life vest itself, you've got water pouches, so you can have some water. It's got seasickness tablets in there as well. It's got hats, gloves, lots of stuff for you to survive.
Obviously, being Navy and not Air Force, you never take the seasickness tablets.
Whatever, I'll just throw them to someone else. Yeah. Whatever, yeah, never take them.
Well, that was another error in the Top Gun film, wasn't it? When Goose died, Maverick was crying, and us Navy guys,
whatever. Yeah, why'd you do that?
Never going to happen. Never going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Never going to happen, especially on camera. That's it. Yeah, that's strength through. Yeah.
So you said an interesting thing, Tim, and of course I'm forgetting. Yeah, the Tornado was a bomber, wasn't it? It wasn't a dog. Wasn't designed for dog fighting.
It was both. It had an air defense variant and it had a bombing variant. An interceptor was a better word for it because it would go up, intercept things, so it wasn't necessarily a fighter. I'm going to get so many spears for this, Chris. If you get any other Air Force guy, listening to this who's flown F3s, it was the F3, the Tornado F3. So you could go two variants, but the main variant, so the man's variant, was the Tornado GR4, which was the bomber. And that's what John Peters and John Nicole got shot down in. They were in a GR1, but a previous version of that. There you go. They got shot down. That is the GR1 that they got shot down in. The updated one with a bit more avionics was called the GR4. It's just a midlife upgrade on the aircraft, really. But yeah. So my role was really a low-level strike role. I'd go in very low, under the enemy radar, bomb targets, kill loads of people, come back, T medals, that kind of stuff.
So let's talk about that then. So when you were in Iraq and you were actually, I'm guessing you were flying, do we call them operational sorties?
Yeah, op sorties, yeah.
Did you have to hit the bomb button?
No. So we've spoken a bit before about this, Chris, anyway. I feel I'm lucky that I never had to prosecute targets in that particular conflict. It wasn't a conflict that many of us agreed with, let's be honest. That said, if I had to put ordnance down to protect the guys on the ground, I would have done it. 24 hours, 24/7, 365, every second. Anyone wanted that bomb, anyone wanted that gun, they were going to get it. Fact. I never had to, and I was quite lucky. There was one, I did 2 tours out there. There was one very nasty event, and I wrote about it. And I wrote, I think the essay was something like, at least you're not a fighter pilot or something, or if you think you've had a bad day, at least you're not, it could be worse. You could be a fighter pilot. And it was about that day when the Prince of Wales Royal Regiment, which was a Hampshire regiment, my home regiment, they got hit pretty hard in a town called Memoir, which is about an hour's north of Basra. IED, roadside bomb, 3 guys killed. They didn't all die at the same time, though. They died over a period of an hour. We were over Basra at the time with a mate of mine called Steve, the guy whose last trip I filmed. And we were called up there. It's called a troops in contact, they're in a bad way. And I got there. And there were bits of, you know, wagons strewn all over the place. I mean, they'd been hit pretty bad, and there was crowds there and everything. You put the jet over, you know, low and fast, that tends to get rid of quite a lot of people that don't want to play when they see a, you know, jet with its wings fully back. It's an angry machine, the tornado. If you don't want to get on the wrong side of it. I mean, it does a lot of, it's a mini war is how I look at it, Chris. I mean, if you bring a tornado into something, you know, a lot of bad things are going to happen very quickly. So when you see that coming over the top of you, especially reheating the back, you know, and then I'm climbing up, then my mate comes in. It's like, you don't want to be around that. If you're up to no good, that's not a good place for you to be now. It was before, when you were putting IEDs by the road and you were clacking them off and everything, and that was fun for you as an insurgent at the time. But now tornadoes are in place above you. You don't want to be there. You're going to mingle back into the crowd. And the reason that was so important is because we're in contact with the guys on the ground, and they were saying one of the guys died pretty much as I arrived there. One of the guys died, and they kept telling us this, and it was kind of weird. So, I don't know. You've had combat, obviously. Strange things happen in combat that you can't really kind of place. It's like, why did that? I remember a Hercules, a big Hercules, coming and landing in the middle of all of this. Now we're on different comms networks, and I'm like, who the hell's speaking to that Hercules? Because does he realise that we've just had a convoy blown up like next door to where he's just landed? So I'm trying to get on the net to go, is that Herc in here to pick up the casualties? Is that why the Hercules coming? And they're like, no, we've got some rotary assets coming up to pick these guys up. There's a couple of Pumas inbound. They're 30 minutes out. I'm like, all right, well, who owns that Hercules? What's that doing there? Like, literally, this massive transport aircraft just landed in the middle of Amara on this strip. I'm saying to my buddy on the wing, I'm like, Steve, have you got anything on comms, mate, about what this guy's... No, not at all. It was random. It was a random... It just had nothing to do with it. It was a pre-arranged sortie. Like, no one... They were on a different comms network. They just rocked up and just landed their Herc there, unloaded some guys, loaded some guys back in. And we're like... They didn't even know that there's operations going on. You know, they didn't even know.
Didn't you have like a mutual military?
Well, yeah, we did. We thought we did. We're on our, you know, our strike frequency, and obviously these guys, I think it was a US Herc, are rocking around on some individual thing. And then a tanker, you know, I'm running out of fuel. I'm like, I've got to go to Baghdad. The tanker tow line is in Baghdad. I'm like, we need to be supporting this. I have no fuel now. And the tankers, this is how good the tanker guys are. You know, these are the guys that give you fuel. Yeah, and the big airplanes, they give you. They were listening to everything we were saying. They dialed into our comms frequency. They'd heard about those troops in contact. They're something like an hour and a half flight time away in Baghdad. You know, we're on the east of Iraq, next to the Iranian border. They're over, you know, to the west of the country. They're hearing this. They know how long we've been in country. They know what time we're supposed to go up to Baghdad to refuel from them anyway. They've done the whole fuel calculations. These are how switched on these multi-engine guys are in the tanking world. They've gone, these guys are not going to have any fuel. Right, let's get down there and let's go and give them fuel, because they're not going to be able to make it up to us. They're going to have to go and land somewhere else. They're going to have to go and land in Jaf or something, or go home. We had no fuel to get home. So they've come down from Baghdad. And as I've called them up, as I've called up our strike frequency and said, guys, I've got to go to Baghdad. I've got no fuel. I'm literally on fumes. The tanker guy, I'm not joking. He says, I think we're Wolf 3-4. He says, Wolf 3-4, look up. And I looked up, and this whole tanker is just coming over the top of me. Like, I'm over this operation, young guys are dying, and the tankers come down to me. And that's how it works. That's how incredible it is. I get straight up there. I refuel. It takes me like, 7-8 minutes. I come back down whilst my buddy Steve does the whole overwatch stuff. And then he goes and gets fuel. And then the tanker, he says, guys, we'll hang on for you. When you're done here, we'll take you back home as well. So they stay with us. And then the whole way back down, unfortunately, Chris, another couple of guys died. And they kept telling us, oh, that guy's died and that guy's died. And that hits you because you can't do anything. And that's one of the biggest things, I think, when we get soldiers with PTSD, a lot of it is from the inaction, not from the action, if that makes sense. A lot of it is the fact that they're there and their mate's been hit by an IED and there's no one to shoot at. You know? How unjust is that? It's like, just give me a fight. I'm happy. I'll fight. I'm ready to fight. It's all I've ever trained for. I mean, what was the point of me going down the bottom field at Lympstone and doing the ropes course and doing the mud runs? I'm fit and I want to fight, and there's no one to fight. It's like the worst kind of war you could ever participate in. Well, and a lot of young men that call me up, that's part of their issue, unfortunately.
Yeah, this is a great chance to point out to our young people listening, considering the military or even in the military, is this is why you can never win these conflicts.
Yeah.
Why we're not there to win these conflicts. We're You know, these conflicts were never about winning. They're about, like Vietnam, extending this conflict as long as possible. So these sadistic, sociopathic banking families and arms companies make more and more money off the lives of these dead young people. But you said it there. It was the same in Ireland. These I'm going to call them the enemy, right? These enemy, they were so good. They could attack you without being seen. They could move in, they could plant the IEDs overnight and then just move away and be operated over a mobile phone call from someone you're never ever going to see, right? Or a command wire which leads away to a firing point that it's completely hidden, or they'll snipe at you. They'll be in a house, they'll have the curtains drawn to within maybe like 2 inches, so the room is dark. They'll be at the back of the room inside a cupboard, like let's just say a cupboard. They've taken the back off the cupboard, the doors of the cupboard are like that, so again so any light coming through that 2-inch gap in the windows isn't going to light up the room. They're then inside a cupboard to hide their like muzzle flash or whatever it might be. Those shots go off, you don't even see where they're coming from. It's not like, right, there's an enemy there, right, fellas, section attack, fix bayonets or whatever the case may be.
That's right.
It doesn't happen. You're there literally to get blown up, bombed, shot at, until simply by the rule that, the logic of attrition, you've lost too many people, and then the politicians are then told, right, now you've got to go and get a peaceful resolution to this, because the American people or the British people are fed up seeing coffins coming back for reasons that they can't put their finger on.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I mean, I could amplify. My father was in Northern Ireland, of course. He was a Marine, 4-5 commando, and he said very, very similar things, about Northern Ireland. I think when was it Martin McInnes was out there? I think he was a sniper with the IRA at the time. One thing I try and talk to people about, especially young people going into the services, is a lot of the people that you're fighting, they don't believe they're the bad people. It's that whole terrorist versus freedom fighter. Now, ISIS probably very different to that, because it's a religious ideology, of course, isn't it? Quite a barbaric one by all intents and purposes. But the IRA, when people look at what the IRA was, a lot of those people in the IRA were fighting, and they firmly believed in what they were fighting for, and rightly so. And you and I, if we were growing up in those times in Ireland, we'd probably be doing the same thing they were doing. It's just is what it is. It doesn't make you any better because you're a Marine, or them any better because they're in the Irish Republican Army. It just is what it is. So when we're fighting these, it's well worth having a very balanced view about conflict when we're going into it. And like the people in southern Iraq that I was over, they weren't nasty, mean men. They were saying, look, you've come into our country, you're invading us, and my businesses have folded now because of you. I mean, and this is why I'm blowing up this Land Rover, because having troops in the middle of Amara means I can't trade like I used to trade properly, and therefore my family's suffering, and my wife's leaving me, and my kids falling out of school, and there's a reason for all this happening. But what people don't do, Chris, they don't go back far enough and say, right, why are we in Iraq in the first place? You see what I mean? And this is what you're nailing here on your channel so well, is you're like, look for the bigger picture. Why are we in Afghanistan? Why are we in Iraq? Who's it serving? Who's the end person for this?
Yeah. I see people say, oh, well, it's about the Taliban. You don't understand. Whoa. First of all, never presume someone else doesn't understand just because they have a different viewpoint, right? Second thing is, no, us guys, we're old enough to know why we went into Afghanistan. And the lie is that they had, I'm going to use the word terrorists. It's not a word I really try not to use because it's completely unhelpful. But the media lies at the time were they've got terrorist training camps, and that they did these terrible atrocity in New York, right? It was blamed on Afghanistan training camps, right? all based on no evidence whatsoever. And why can we say that? Well, we can safely say that because there was never an investigation into what happened in New York, ever. No criminal investigation, no aircraft investigation, which is, as you and I know, is mandatory under the FAA law.
Yeah, yeah.
If a plane crashes, let alone bloody, what was it, 1, 2, 3 of four of them, and there was no FAA really, right? So anyway, so the lie was it was that these atrocity was blamed on these terrorist training camps in Afghanistan, and that was the reason behind the invasion. It was nothing ever to do with Taliban. That came, that came later when the Taliban put up a fight because they've got troops landing in their country, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I might not have dotted all the T's and crossed the I's, but it's this kind of thing. But irregardless, I would just like to say communication is everything. The avenues of communication need to be explored before you hit the red button and start bombing people, and if anyone thinks that these drones that are taking out like innocent wedding parties, and they get their ace of spades, but by doing it, they level a whole freaking street of an innocent village in the mid. If you can't see that just creates more enemy, then you're probably not that smart,
Yeah, but it's a business, Chris. It's a business war. I think Smedley Butler said that. Smedley Butler was a United States Marine Corps guy back in 1912 or 15. I can't remember now. I have to look it up. But he said war is a racket. I think he wrote a whole essay on it. Of course it is. It's a business. And it's a very big business. And there's a lot of people employed in it. I mean, I speak, I'm employed by a defense firm. I prefer to say they're an aviation design and manufacturing company, Aerolith. It's a way of building a modular flying training aircraft. And a UAV type thing as well. It's a very good thing. But I don't look at it as a defense business as such. But majority of my friends I know are in defense in some way. And I don't really want to be in defense, to be honest with you. I've been offered business development roles with all sorts of different companies. And I get it. It just doesn't make me feel, I don't know what the word is, because I feel very hypocritical having spent 20 years in the military. I'm happy that I've done that in the military. I'm happy not to do it anymore. And I'm not being self-righteous. And the only place you can ever fly these airplanes, where is it here, is in the military. There's nowhere, you can't fly them anywhere else. If you want to fly those airplanes, you join the military. For me, if I was, and I get it, because the dynamic flying you're doing, when do you get a chance to land a Hercules on a beach? Well, unless you're in the military, you're never going to get that. My brother was a Hercules pilot, by the way. He was a transport guy, tactical Hercules guy. So he would land aircraft all over Afghanistan. He has a great story about how he kind of went rogue with a British Hercules in Afghanistan. It just ended up, like, the lines of communication got a bit fuzzy and ended up kind of working for the Americans. They ended up in the wrong part of the country. And there was this British Hercules with all the American Hercules. And he's like, I think we've kind of messed this up. There's only him and his loadmaster and his co-pilot. And they're like, I don't think the Air Force knows where we really are. But you know what I mean? You don't get those stories by flying a 787 from here to Madrid, twice a week. So there is a reason to go into the military, but you're right. Communication and eyes need to be really open, because, I mean, I can remember, and I'm not only going to sidetrack here. Remember in Afghanistan, we went into Afghanistan and we quickly then went into Iraq, didn't we? Because Donald Rumsfeld said there's no good targets in Afghanistan. And of course he wants targets. He wants things to blow up, doesn't he? So it looks like they're actually having, and of course it's all to do with oil and everything else in Iraq. And it was a regime change, which the United States have been involved in. If you type in United States regime change, which is illegal by the Geneva Convention, everything else, and law of armed conflict, you'll see America, that's all they've done. I'm not saying we haven't. We just do it a lot quieter than they do.
I need to clarify here, Tim, because it's not the American people we're talking about, the same as we're not talking about the British people. And we're not slandering our wonderful service personnel. It comes down to a document that was written called Rebuilding America's Defenses. This is the policy that informed these illegal invasions. That policy, Rebuilding America's Defenses, which said, and America needs to increase its military dominance in the world. I'm paraphrasing here.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
However, it will not do so without a new Pearl Harbor, right? This is why it's no surprise that then what happened in New York happened to give this document the new Pearl Harbor that it needed. Now, that document was written by a group called PNAC, Project for the New American Century. And this was they call it a neo-conservative think tank.
Right.
And it was all the, I'm talking, Tim, I'm not just sort of lecturing you, I'm talking to
No, I'm unfamiliar, so I'm listening.
The people at home, obviously.
Yeah.
Who might not know this. I know a lot of people have done their research. But this neo-conservative think tank were like these rogue elements that had basically almost like completely infiltrated the Bush administration. They were controlling that idiot like the puppet that he is, right? We need to remember that George Bush, the Bush family, is a huge crime family. If you read their history, their family fortune was founded on opium smuggling, right? Which is not something you're going to hear about. That was great grandfather Bush. Grandfather Bush, he arranged loans for the Luftwaffe during the war so they could get their fuel, right? So this is an American doing what that war dealing or whatever that, you know, supplying the enemy. He also, that granddad had shares or a controlling role in a factory that used slave labor, a steel factory that used slave labor from Auschwitz, right? This is the Bush family we're talking about. Okay, you want to talk about the Clintons and what they did? Was it in Arkansas where they controlled the runway that was importing cocaine from Central America, and then the cocaine, the very cocaine that caused the crack epidemic in America, right? That's another family again, right? These are the people that you go and vote for Britain's the same, you know. Don't vote, folks. Don't keep voting in this corrupt system. Anyway, going back to that document, so you've got this project for the new American century. And, well, who are those individuals? Well, they're not patriotic Americans. They are just a group of rogue, elitist businessmen that wrote that document, obviously, to shape the world in the way that they want it shaped, so they can reap all the profits of the, you know, control the oil, control the drugs coming out of Afghanistan and all this sort of stuff. So, sorry, I've just gone on a bit of a mad one then.
No, I think it's important. People don't.
It's really understand this is not the American people, and the same as it's not the British people. It's this little narcissistic, sociopathic group of elitist isn't the right word, but they've got their own agenda. They control the whole planet. They send our young men and women off to war to come back with their legs blown off and their eyes, you know, blown out or in body bags, and they don't care. And they don't care. And it's unless people like you and I, Tim, speak out about the reality of war, what it's really about, then, well, there's never going to be an end to it, is there?
But it's hard though, Chris, because, you know, I'm actually quite envious of the way America supports its service people. And what I mean by that is we don't do it like this in the UK. We're very British, the way we support, you know, our service people, aren't we? But America, everything. When I'm on like an American podcast or I have an American writes to me, they're always thanking me for my service. And I'm like, I was getting paid, you know, I got paid. Don't worry about it. It's all good. They're like, no, thank you for your service. And it's a big thing with them. They're almost like, if you don't say that to an American serviceman, then, you know, there's something wrong with you. You know, you're a bad person. I'm quite envious of the way they do support those people, but I know in doing so, it's for a reason. So you're not going to get young people to go to these conflicts unless you have that level of support unless you're telling them about the American flag, you know, about freedom. Well, that's a load of, I don't want to swear on your podcast here. I'm not going to swear on your podcast, but freedom, America is the least free country. I mean, I'm not going to go on a rant right now, but you know, we can look at America right now. Look what's happening in America right now. And we're talking about freedoms. And so we've got to be very careful about the narrative that's espoused from our politicians and how we go about it. But, you know, you've got to be able to send people to war. And you're not going to be able to send people our age to war, Chris. Why? Because we think too much and because our brains are too developed, unfortunately. And young people, especially the people that write to me, you know, thankfully, and I say thankfully because I don't know how else we'd ever send people to war. You know, these guys are young, they're enthusiastic, they're like I was, or like you were when you joined up the Corps. And those are the guys you send out. And that's always going to be that way.
People don't understand this whole thank you for your service, sir. It's a crock of shit. It's a control game. It came around after Vietnam, where Americans were so sick of having their young men, and it was young men in that war, not there might have been some women, but they were so sick of them seeing them slaughtered, and they couldn't see a reason why. It's like why we had this 10-year war, body bags just coming back into the United States. What to fight over communism in a country where it's rice farmers? They earn like $1 a year. Yeah. They don't care if they're communist, nationalist, you know, feminist. They're just rice. They don't care, right? So here's the thing. These sociopaths that I always talk about thought, the tide of public opinion, not just in the US, but worldwide, is turning anti-war. They're seeing the facade of it all. They're seeing the sham. That's kind of, I'll swear, that's fucked our global plan up for global dominance. So what can we do? Let's have a think. Right, I know what we do. Let's sell the public that they cannot criticize service people. Let's start coming up with some rhetoric like, thank you for your service, sir. And let's put it across that if you say that you're being like really respectful to a serviceman, when in actual fact, you're not, because what you're doing is perpetuating the myth that war is an honorable thing, that it's a good thing to go and kill other teenagers to make these psychos even more powerful, right? That is where that came around, right? It's the same as buy a serviceman a cup of coffee. It's also, you know, I've got to be careful what I say here, but it's also why I personally, in my mind, I tread really carefully around things like Remembrance Day and what's happening to our monuments and stuff, right? Because as much as, yes, of course, we respect the dead, that is why we are saying what we're saying now, because we genuinely respect the dead in our hearts, and this is what's coming out of our mouths. Putting a red thing on every year and going to a memorial, that also, we got to be careful there, because that has the effect of entrenching this hero myth.
Yeah, that's right.
Entrenching this heroic to go and die and heroic. And I'm not saying the individuals are not heroes. As I say, I love our servicemen and women. I love all people. It's why I say what I say. But we've got to be careful to keep looking at wars as though it's freedom and democracy, when it's not, when in actual fact, I think very few conflicts, when it came down to it, were about good and evil or freedom and democracy.
You're right. And I'm the same thing especially with the poppies. I don't wear a poppy, by the way, and I do get stick for that. And I never really could articulate why I didn't wear a poppy, because it's nothing disrespectful about it. But I realized, and I have realized over the last, couple of years, it's to do with the way the media has sensationalized Remembrance Day. I don't want to be part of that. I don't want to be part of, I'm not having anything on my car, and even when it comes down to help the heroes, stickers on cars and things like that, or T-shirts and things, that Help for Heroes should have been a government service, not an you know what I mean? It's like, you can't send your men and women out to conflict, come back, and then I remember Gordon Brown standing next to them, I think, when they'd first formed. It was either Help for Heroes or it was another one. I can't remember, Combat Stress or something, I think. And going, oh, we're really proud of these people for standing up this charity to help our service. And I'm like, you should have fucking done that, mate. That was your prime minister. That's the whole point. You know what I mean? It's like, you can't bring these people back and then, oh, are we going to palm them off into the private sector so that they can get rehabilitative care and stuff like this. But with the Poppy and with People Remembrance Days, and now it's on, it's so done, isn't it? It's a massive press thing. It's saccharine,
Tim, it's all just to support the narrative of war, that war is an honorable thing. And it's not, it's never about, it's very rarely about freedom and democracy. I don't know, you get conflict like the Falklands, which, that was, personally, I think communication.
Yeah, that would have worked better. And that would have worked, Chris. Communication was working.
Communication.
It wasn't given the time.
A few sanctions put in the right places.
Yeah.
I think Argentina may well have, but I don't want to sound like I'm slandering my friends that went there and fought. Because I know they were, most of them were teenagers and they were hard as nails, those guys, But
you would have been there too. You and I would have been there too. Of course we would have done.
Oh, of course we would. And I'd
love the opportunity. For me, crack on. I'd done that in a heartbeat. But
well, Tim, let's clarify here. We've both been in a form of combat, so we are allowed to speak our truth, right?
I'll let anyone speak their truth, Chris. It doesn't matter whether the guy's... Anyone's got an opinion, I'll listen to it, all right? It's as valid. I think what's fortunate about you and I is that we spent time in the military, and now we're talking about the military. So hopefully people are listening to it going, well, I'm interested in that. It's got to be genuine. These guys know what they're talking about. But honestly, anyone writes to me, I listen to everyone. And I think you do as well, because, you're a very open guy. And I would just quickly say, I did serve with the US military in Afghanistan, obviously in Iraq as well, but primarily in Afghanistan. I was on a 6-month ground tour of the US Army. I was the only British guy there. And the professionalism of the US Army is just incredible. And the leaders that they have, so they're senior generals, the academic ability of these men and women, I'm not saying it outshines us. It doesn't. They have more of them, is what I think it is. So you get a lot more from these very senior people. They would have a conversation like we're having now. They are very open, I think, personally, to everything we are saying. In the middle ranks, of course, you don't really have time for that. So in what would be your major ranks, and your lieutenant colonel ranks, and those ranks where you're pushing into the sort of general, you really want to get up in the Air Force, we'd say, into a starred rank. You haven't really got much time for a critical discourse. You like to think you have, but you're running squadrons, you're running a base, you're doing these kind of things. You like to think you have. I like to think I had as well. I was wrapped up like 12, 15 hours a day on a flying training squadron. I had very little time to do much thinking. Reading, yes. Thinking, no. Now, of course, we have a lot more time. And these Americans that I worked with were just very, very aware. And I was very impressed. So I would say that about the US military. I was absolutely astounded. I didn't think I would be. And I was very impressed by the senior and the very junior levels of the American military.
Yeah. I love spending time with Americans. I just think they're such wonderfully kind people. All the ones I've met a few assholes, but that's the same the world over, right?
Yeah.
They are so generous and so kind, and it's like they want to learn about, for a country where, God, I'm starting to spit, for a country that's kind of written up as like they don't know much about other countries and stuff. They remarkably they're very open. I think it's just their geography and their education is kind of puts the blinkers on there a bit. But it's obvious what's happening in the world. The people of Britain, the people of America, and the wonderful people of Israel are all being played off against each other by this sociopathic bunch of idiots that no one ever reflects on, because they're too busy going down to the voting polls and arguing about what Trump's doing next week, or is Tony Blair better than Gordon Brown, and falling for all the minutiae, all the theatre and the puppetry and what Sky News saying about David Cameron next. we need to be looking at these people, not looking down all the time. And you and I see it, mate. But then again, we've trod down that path to enlightenment, haven't we? Because we knew there was more in this life than what we'd been told.
Yeah, I think it's important to get out of the military sometimes. I mean, I'll be honest with you. You know, the military's called me up and said, you know, we're desperate for instructors. Would you come back in? And, you know, I struggle with that sometimes, especially now the private sector's not doing very well. It's like, do I go back into the military? It's a hard one. And I'm not, this is why I don't have a go at people in the military. I was there, you were there. We understand it, right? A lot of these people have young families and they're providing for their families. Totally get it. 110%. Let's not think the military are the people making these decisions to go to war as well, because we know they're not. And that's exactly what you just said. There's a global structure loosely inhabited by politicians, of course, that make decisions to go into conflict. And unfortunately, the tool they use is the military. So, you know, I'm very supportive of people in the military, all public sector, really. It's not an easy place right now. But when I go back in now, I don't know. It's nice to be out and to be able to have these conversations.
Well, it's the same if if you're in the Marines and let's just say you're getting 25,000 a year.
Yeah.
And then suddenly a contract comes up in the Middle East doing, or in the Indian Ocean doing anti-piracy or protecting some, essential workers in Iraq or Afghanistan, whatever it might, and they're going to pay you 150,000 a year. I mean, and maybe you haven't done the thinking that you and I have done, Tim, because you've been in the military. And I'll be honest, when I was in the military, I didn't really think like the way I thought now. I thought about what am I doing at the weekend? Am I going to get pissed on Saturday night?
Yeah.
What mountain bike am I going to buy? That's kind of like where my thinking was, right?
Yeah.
It was through addiction, actually, which I think we're going to come on to, that I had to start thinking because I was going to die. No one can come and rescue an addiction. People can help, but essentially you have to, you've got to get yourself out of that trap, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But so it's the same. Like I say, the security industry, you can't really blame someone for going. The exact people that I'm talking about are the ones that really benefit from these security companies in the Middle East, aren't they? Who are essentially protecting their assets. And it's just that same thing again, that I don't really blame the individual. I just think it's the system. And I do think
individuals have responsibility, though. I mean, I remember, you watch Ant Middleton, Jason Fox, Ollie Ollerton, all those guys now have come out. People are coming out, they're writing books, they're doing their TV programs, whatever it is. I do think you've got to accept the bed you make is the one you lie in. And if you want to go forth and push a narrative of, armed conflict is the way forward, well, you're going to be judged on that as well. I don't push that, by the way. I do say to people that want to join the military, it's a pretty good career, but don't stay too late. Have a plan. Get in there, get what you need to get done and get out again and do something worthwhile with your time. So, I mean, there are people come out, don't they, with sensationalist books. I mean, it's very interesting. You look at, I think we do it here in the UK, we do it stateside as well with Jocko Willink and David Goggins. And there's a lot of people that come out. Navy SEALs seem to write quite a lot, don't they, for some reason? I don't know. They seem to write everything. But there are some people coming out, and there's some very mature narrative coming out now about these conflicts that we've been fighting.
Do you think so? I find, and I'm not going to pick any individual.
Yeah, go on.
That's not my thing. But I find with these former Navy SEALs, when you're building a bit of rapport with this guy's narrative, and then they come out with some shit like, and then we got the bad guys, and you're like,
yeah, that's right.
Fucking God.
Yeah, well, are they not playing to their audience though, Chris? This is what I find as well. It's like, I don't want to hear that, but there are people that want to hear it. So one of the best books I recently read was about a guy called Chapman, who was a guy that was killed. I think he got I'm going to find his book right now because I want to get the title of this book. I'm going to go quick on Amazon here and just get the title of this book down, because I think I read this book. I started out a new workout thing because I was deep into coming out of the military, problems with alcohol and all these kind of things. And so I started this huge workout thing. I listened to this book about this guy whilst working out, and you can't help but have a good workout listening to what this guy did and what young guys like him did. And I think in that respect, let me just find out what it's called.
So
There are some
what,
more stories from the US military.
while you do that, I'm just going to hit the pause button because I need to go and punch an elephant.
Okay.
So just bear with me.
No worries.
Okay, that wasn't an elephant, that was a water buffalo, and that's when things get really messy, folks.
That's what happens sometimes. So the book is a book called Alone at Dawn, and so a lot of what comes out of the US military is, I would say, quite sensationalist. I think we've kind of touched upon that now. But this is a story of a Medal of Honor recipient, John Chapman. I think he was going to get 2 Medals of Honor if that was possible. But he was a special ops combat controller in Afghanistan, and he ends up charging some hill. The whole operation is an absolute goat. I don't know whether you guys use that term as well. It was flawed from beginning to end. I think it was quite early on in Afghanistan. Goat. We call it
goat. I always think Freemasons because that's their mascot, isn't it?
Oh, is it really? No, we call it a rolling goat. Like a goat starts rolling down a hill. It's like, yeah, everything's falling apart. But they end up being inserted on the wrong hill. You know, you can imagine what's happening. He's a combat controller embedded with US Navy SEALs, and they end up with this gunfight going on where everyone's getting shot up. I think a Chinook gets hit by an RPG when it's on the ground and abandoned. And the whole thing was in the wrong place, the wrong time, and the whole operation should have been scrubbed. Like, it shouldn't have happened. Notwithstanding that, the heroic actions of this one guy, you can't read about him and think, you know, what happened and what he did was just truly amazing. So Alone at Dawn is the book. If you read it as if you get it as an audio book as well, I like audiobooks, like when I'm in the car. That's an amazing story.
So I'm guessing the guy's dead. The guy died, did he?
The guy did die, yeah. But I mean, it took him, you know, a good 12 hours. I mean, he took a load of rounds and he fought throughout. And they actually abandoned him thinking he was dead, and then had to come back because he wasn't. And he was dead. But
I might even do a reaction video to that.
Oh, yeah. I tell you what, after this, I'll send you the video of him, the Medal of Honor. There was a Predator drone over the top of it, filming the whole time. And it's obviously at night, so you have the shapes moving around. And it describes the guy who actually made the videos, Dan Schilling, one of the authors of the book. And he describes the movement of this guy up this hill, and he's outmaneuvering his team to get in a position where you can protect them from the bunker that's pouring, fire down from RPGs and all sorts of things. So I'll send you that film. It's on YouTube, and then you could do a reaction on that.
Yeah.
Maybe have a look at the book and then talk about that book. I think you'd be. The reason I talk about it here, Chris, is that I'm very careful not to belittle the achievements of the US military. I'm not here putting the US military or the British military, anyone down. It's like, we do what we need to do, and we do it so well. And it is awful that there are lives lost. That's not the issue. Like, I'm proud to have served, and my brother is proud to have served. My father served. You're proud to have served. Now let's have the conversation about whether we should have been in those conflicts, because people did die. You know, that's what I'm saying. It's like, don't miss the debrief. You know what I mean?
It's not just that they died, Tim, is it? It's that the world now is a far more dangerous place because of what's going on in the Middle East. We actually do now face threats at home, which were fictitious before. We never, they possible but unlikely. Now, the anger the outrage that this is instilled in let's say young Muslim men in this country has created a real, and that's not fair on those young men. It's not fair on our young people, and it's not fair on the people in the Middle East that have had to have this, all this ordnance dropped on them and their infrastructure ripped out. And
yeah, that's right. But that's how you get American money or British money into the country, and that's how you get these companies going in there and fixing these things. And that's just the racket it is. I mean, when Saddam Hussein was removed, when we went into Iraq, of course, you leave through regime change, you leave this vacuum, and that's what happened. And then everyone comes in to fill that vacuum, don't they? And that was the issue. Now you have many different factions, and the whole thing ends up so complicated, it's unworkable. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
No, I absolutely congratulate you for your honesty, mate. It's so refreshing to you know, to have it come from a guest rather than it always feels top down from me. And so then I feel like shutting up about it because, you know, you don't.
No, I remember before we went, we were one of the first squadrons to go out to Afghanistan back in 2003. One of the first tornado squadrons. There were only tornadoes in country at the time. And I think the Harriers were in Afghanistan at the time. We were tornadoes in Iraq. One of the first squadrons. And I remember a solicitor coming to the squadron. She was external. She came on, the Ministry of Defense had sent her, and she sat us all down, like the whole squadron, boss and everything. And she said, if you drop in country, remember it was about the UN resolution that we're using back from 1991 or something, trying to use the same one, weren't we? Saying it's still valid, still valid. It's like, and the UN weren't granting us what we needed. And she said, if you drop in country, there's every chance you're going to be held up in a civilian court of law on your return. And I'm like, but I've got a bomber going out there. There's I don't know, 12 jets there or whatever. And they're tooled up. I mean, these things are, you know, these things are not toys, right? Our job is to go out there and destroy a lot of targets because that's the mindset we're in. We must go out there and bomb things. And she says, just letting you guys know that when you come back, if you do drop out in country, you'll probably be out in a civilian court of law. Now, we had a like a flow chart on our knee board that we used to fly with because of this. And when a call came in from something called Chariot was the higher authority, and it would say Chariot directs Wolf 3-4 to proceed to this kill box to do. You go through this thing and you say, have we been ordered? Do we have authority? What is this? And you go through these steps, and it would minimize the chance of you being brought up in a civilian court of law on your return. Isn't that incredible? So I had a tank commander I knew as well, and he phoned me up before I went out there, and he said, I'm pushing across the border right now. What's the feeling back home? And I said, dude, it's like you're not allowed. It's like back home, we haven't got a resolution for you to enter the country. And he's like, well, we're 20 miles south of Baghdad right now. It was crazy. It was crazy. And I'm not saying I laugh about it now, but I remember getting into the country and there being American assets in there and everything. And I remember my navigator and me thinking, we've got to be really careful we don't actually drop anything here. In fact, that particular day I talked about in Amaro when those 3 young men died, I had a squadron exec in the back seat of my airplane. So he was a flight commander. I ended up being a flight commander. A flight commander is someone, there's the boss, then there's 3 flight commanders, and there's senior ranks, and then there's all the pilots and ground crew and everything else. He was a flight commander on my squadron, and he said, I'll never forget this, as we pushed up to where all the bombing had happened, we flew over the top, and he said, Tim, there's a lot to be said for not being the first aircraft to drop in a combat theatre. And that he was one of the execs. He's like the deputy boss. And at the time, I'm this young kind of, what was I, maybe 30-year-old combat pilot, want to put some stuff down, I want to sort the boys out. And he's like, there's a lot to be said for not being that first person to drop. And now, he's right, Chris. He's absolutely right. You want to let someone else do that first and see what happens to them. Yeah. And that's because you don't feel assured by your chain of command. No. That's because they don't feel assured by it. That's the truth. It's a strange time.
The title for a good book, isn't it? A funny thing happened when we went to war.
Yeah, but no one would believe it, would they? That's the thing.
Tim, you've been very honest already about, we're talking about the drugs and alcohol thing. So I'm just going to make a note of the time here. Yes, alcohol, if it's not a big problem in the forces, which it kind of is, it certainly seems to create big problems for us guys when we leave, doesn't it?
Yeah. I've done a load of work into this. I run a program with individuals now called the Total Control Method, because I believe that, and we're going to differ on this, Chris, and that is fine. And I know we're going to differ because I differ with my sisters and my brother and my parents, and I differ with a lot of people that have gone through substance misuse, because I believe that there is a control element that that control elements can sometimes be stronger than the abstinence. Now, a lot of people will say it doesn't work for me, and that's fine. A lot of people it doesn't work for, but for some people it does. And there's actually a movement, it's quite big in America, that looks at control alcohol use and they control their alcohol use even though they have dependencies on it. I'm one of those people, right? So I came out of the military, and alcohol for me wasn't great when it was in the military because everyone's using it, and we do. And then coming out of the military, when you come out of the military, that structure's gone. it's very easy to just get in that habit of sitting on your sofa. For me, having a few beers, I put on loads of pounds, and now I'm getting rid of all that, and I'm proud of myself for the work I'm doing on me. And I help other people through a course I run called the Spin Recovery Program. I've just taken 6 guys through that course, all guys, by the way, all in their 40s and 50s. And we talk about a lot of things that tends to affect men of our age, women as well. But it just so happens that I think men get to a point in their 40s where they're like, what is it about? What am I doing? You know what I mean? It's kind of based in Buddhism philosophy, but it also comes into a lot of Jungian philosophy as well, like Carl Jung, stuff like that, about personal responsibilities. So I did come out. I had problems with alcohol, most definitely, 100%, hands up. I took a whole year off back in 2017 where I didn't drink anything, went straight back to it, you know, like you do. And I was always taught as a naval officer, of course, you're probably aligned with this a little bit, that it was about hard drinking in the evening and you still come to work and you get in your jet and you get the job done. That's it. So I don't want to hear excuses. You got to be in the bar. It's like, all right, I'm in the bar every night. You know, that's where the learning took place. After a flight, you go to the bar. That's what everyone did. And you talk about your trips. You talk about your flight. That's where the debrief happened. You know, that's what it's all about. Smash the beers in. Good times, don't get me wrong. And then I realized it's a bit of a problem. And if you, family history, my father was alcoholic towards the end of his life. And it killed him at 65, really. It wasn't alcohol so much, but emphysema from being on warships with his asbestos. And he had a rebreather accident when he did special boat training back in late 60s, I think it was. And that really ripped up his lungs, you know, so he wasn't the healthiest guy when it came to the end of his police career. But so he was alcoholic, mum was alcoholic, you know, people within our family have had problems with alcohol, extended family. It just seems to be that thing that we have. You know, there's depression within our family as well, to a certain extent. My sister's a psychiatrist.
I think you're a nice enough and kind enough man that I can respectfully challenge you here. Could we say there were people that had problems with alcohol as opposed to calling them alcoholics?
Yeah, absolutely. So in America, they call it alcohol use disorder.
I'm not trying to be pedantic and I'm not being rude.
No, go on.
My guess, it's just the biggest problem I faced in my whole experience of addiction, which still goes on to today.
Yeah, yeah.
And for your, just going back to what you said, I've never been abstinent. I've never ever tried to be. I took 2 years off drinking once, which was my choice.
Yeah.
And I found it quite actually easy to just not drink because my life was so brilliant during that time, right?
Yeah.
But going back to my challenges, my problem wasn't with the kind of levels of depredation my life sunk to through substance abuse, right? My problem came in was the way society dealt with me, the way I was viewed, the way I'm still viewed today, and here's the thing, right? And apologies to people listening. This is not Chris blowing his trumpet or whatever, but as I'm always saying, I'm a pilot, skydiver, best-selling author. I've lived, worked and traveled in 80 countries across all 7 continents. I've achieved every single dream and goal in my life. I'm undoubtedly the happiest person I ever meet, right? And by happy, I mean balance, right? I'm not always laughing, right? I have the most awesome family I only could have dreamt about when I was young. I literally love every single day. I've worked with, you know, street kids in post-war Mozambique. I've driven volunteer journalists to India and back by bus. I've screamed my ass off throwing myself out of military aircraft, right? I basically just had the most amazing life, all of which off my, you know, nobody gave it to me. I created all of this, right?
Yeah.
Same as when I write my book, I put the words. I don't get a ghostwriter to do it for me.
Yeah.
My YouTube channel, I started it. I learned like what that thing does and why I needed it. And I paid the money from my savings for it. I learned what that thing there is, what that thing there is, what that box there with about £6,000 of equipment, all of which I paid for out my savings, right? Here's the thing, all those things still get people out there, Tim. Oh, you're a drug addict, right? I'm not talking about slagging me off here or anything now. What I mean is they genuinely think it's appropriate to refer to me with this one label instead of all the other things I've just listed. You know, you could say,
Yeah.
oh, Chris, you're the pilot, or you're the author. Oh, Chris, right? And here's the thing: it doesn't bother me. Of course, it doesn't. I'm 50 years old. I couldn't care less. But what it does is it upsets me that we're still referring to people by their mental health condition. Because if you went up to someone and said, "Oh, I heard you're a cancer," everyone in that room would turn around and pummel you into the ground. I'm not talking to you, Tim. I'm talking to the.
Yeah, no, I get you.
You know, everyone would turn around and kick the fucking shit out of you, right? Quite rightly so, because you'd never refer to someone with cancer as being a cancer, whereas you refer to someone who's battling a horrible condition called addiction, which is not their fault. It's generally a result. The driver of addiction, for the most part, is childhood trauma. So not only do they have a fucking tough time when they're a kid, they're still, and they didn't ask for that because they're a child, right? They're still battling with it as a 50-year-old adult, right? This is this guy you see here. And what's the one thing you do rather than big them up and big up their self-confidence and their persona and their achievements in life? No, you call them we use the one name of like the biggest thing that's wrong, you know, the worst thing they've ever had to face. So this is not at all having a go at you, Tim. I just want to make the point for people at home. The language we use is so powerful in keeping people in oppression.
Yeah, it keeps people down. Yeah.
You know, let's and I just want to kind of make it a bit of not a mission of mine as such, but I just want to enlighten people where possible to the inappropriateness of the language they use. It's no different. You say, "Oh, she's a whore." Do you mean she's like actually a professional that makes her living by selling sex? There's that, you know, the power of language has that. One of those statements has a position to make that woman the worst thing in the world. The other has the position to actually make her quite an intellectual, clever business person.
But Chris, I mean, you're talking about idiots a lot of the time here. I mean, we're placing too much value into some individuals. I'm a big fan of the issue with labeling, and I think you're talking about the same thing. Sometimes I get it. One of the things I used to get, this is before I left the military, and my wife would say this. She'd say, "You hate your job." Now, we understand that something called projection, don't we? Sometimes where we can project onto other people, and if she didn't like her job, she might want to project onto me, like, "You hate your job." And it wasn't necessarily a projection, but I used to say to her, "I don't hate my job. I find it really, really, really frustrating. It's incredibly tiring. It's wrecked my neck. I'm like a giraffe, you know." And now, luckily, she's a chiropractor. You know, I'm a sensible guy. But it's, you know, fighter pilot marries chiropractor. It kind of works out quite well. But I used to say to her, "Look, don't label me with stuff. All right, you don't need to. I can tell you what I am. I'm a frustrated fast jet pilot who's struggling against a system that doesn't seem to be want to be accountable for itself. You know, I mean, we're privatizing military flight and training, and it's a problem, and we don't say it." So I think what you're saying, when I might say someone's alcoholic or something, I don't necessarily label someone like that. I don't see alcoholism as the issue. I see societal factors as the causation of the addiction, not the addiction being the problem. The addiction is, you know, I think Jordan Peterson once said it. He was talking about one of his patients. Obviously, he was a psychiatrist, and he was saying he had a patient, and he was like, you don't have depression. You just have a really shit life. You know, it's like, you're not depressed. Like, everything in your life is just rubbish and hard and difficult. You know, and this guy's got, "I'm so depressed." He's like, You're not depressed. It's like your marriage is falling apart. You just lost your job. You know, you're drinking too much. You're overweight. It's like anyone like you would be feeling sad. It's like, you know, you just got a shit life. So I look at that when I work with these individuals, and some of them are, you know, very senior people in industries and stuff. When we work about alcohol as part of their life, we break this down. We talk about labels. We talk about, like what you're saying, what people say to them. We talk about their lifestyle, what's happening in their world, and why they feel that alcohol needs to be a part of that. It's a very easy part, alcohol. It's very acceptable. I mean, you can find it anywhere, can't you? I went, when I wasn't drinking in 2017, because obviously when we're drinking, because when we have these addictions, or when we have these these props, shall we call it, these things that we just seem to have. We're very conscious of going somewhere new because you have to have access to it. We all understand that. It's like someone says, do you want to go camping? You're like, well, not really, because I'm not too sure there's a bar anywhere. You know how that is. In 2017, I did this thing where I went, well, I don't care because I'm not drinking at all anyway. So it doesn't matter where I go. And there wasn't a single night where I couldn't have got alcohol if I wanted it. Everywhere I traveled, everywhere I went, it was available everywhere. I mean, literally everywhere. It was amazing to see. And it just is now. So if you're trying to stop something like that, it's there constantly, everywhere. It's incredible. So I do advocate control. I do.
Tim,
yeah.
why did you say you feel most people would disagree with you? Is that
with the control? So for example, there's people in recovery in my family, and they don't believe that you can control alcohol. So they think you either stop it or not. Everyone controls alcohol, by the way, to some. If you've stopped alcohol, you're controlling it. Okay? Of course you are. Of course you are. Up until the time you don't.
I just wanted to say that's my philosophy.
Right. Okay. See, and this is, again, I don't know whether we will get on with this. Obviously, I think we are getting on and we're more aligned. We don't need to be aligned, Chris, but I think we're more aligned in what we're saying than I thought we would be. However, one of my things is, I felt alcohol had beaten me when I stopped drinking in 2018. I felt really subservient to the fact that, I've stopped drinking for a whole year. I've stopped it. It's like alcohol's won. Now, by controlling alcohol and deciding when I drink or don't drink, and it might be months might go past, weeks, days, it could be anything, but I decide I'm in control. And it's very empowering to me to be in control of something that I felt I wasn't necessarily in control of before. Now I can decide. And someone can come along and go, do you want a beer, Tim? And I'm like, actually, no. Because for me, like many people, one beer has to be 12. It's not enough. I don't understand people that have a beer at lunchtime. I'm not that person. I can't, well, I can, but I'll just be miserable forever, So for me, and that's a very military thing, isn't it? You don't go for a beer. You don't go for a beer.
No, I'm completely with you. Yes, and I everything you're saying is like, it's like you're talking my story.
Right.
I'm exactly all these things. I've got myself into a position where I don't drink for the most part, right? I don't drink because my life is just so much better without it.
Yeah.
I don't drink because when I wake up in the morning after drinking, I feel like I've poisoned myself. So that by definition makes it a bit stupid to poison myself, right? I drank and did drugs for 30 years. It wasn't always the heavy stuff. It might be a joint, a joint. And sometimes it was like 12 beers in the evenings. We're talking 12 tinnies now, And I mean, it was normal. No, it wasn't normal. It was completely abnormal. But I was a single guy. I could get away with it, right? I hate to use the cliche, I work. But the thing is, I was a writer. So I could drink when I wrote it. There was nobody.
That's right. That's right.
And here's the thing is now, when I get on it, so to speak, it's that little voice in your head that says, yeah, nice cold beer, be nice in this sun. And I know when that thought comes in, it's never just going to be a nice cold beer. For a start, I'd never have one.
That's right.
I want to have at least 4 before I sort of even feel a bit merry, right? But then I get on like this ride where I have to keep feeding the bear so I don't get the come down.
Yeah.
And in my form, that will be like, I'll wake up in the morning and I'll grab that beer that was left over from last night and crack down it. Brilliant. Don't feel anywhere near as good as when I had that beer yesterday. It's a bit like the chasing the crack cocaine thing. The first hit is like, wow, man, that was blown my bloody socks off. The next one isn't quite as good. And the thing with the drinking is I fall in, I have to see this pattern through to come back out the other side, right? And I've got it in the bag. Believe me, I've done this so many times now. So this myth of one drink and you can't go. No, nonsense. You can control it. The point for me is I can control it to a point, right? And I'm well aware when that point is. So for me, that binge will be like a 3-day thing.
Yeah, so it goes on for about 3 days.
By the third day, I'm so fed up with this behavior. It's so fucked up my perfect life now.
Yeah.
No, I'm feeling shit. I've lost what I call my Kundalini high, so my serpent power. So I'm not on clouds anymore like I usually am. I've come down and I'm kind of like on the normal level, probably like a lot of people feel in their everyday life.
Yeah, makes sense.
I've gone off my alkaline diet, which is really important to me. So that's fresh greens all the time. So again, my high has come down. My sleep is fractured. I'm now having to work, not pissed, but under the influence. And so you start to make professional decisions, which they're not that clever. And boy, have I made some stupid ones, right? On top of that, of course, alcohol affects your relationships. So my relationship with my family now is suffering. Whether I like it or not, it in some way it is suffering. Yeah, whether it's that you're too huggy and you're too happy, or whether it's that the anti to that is that you've got a bloody bad temper. Whatever it's. So I get that 3-day kick up the ass, wake up call, and that's all I need, Tim, is to go right. Psh, that's the last one, and this is the level of control I've developed after having no control, really. Not no control. Let's say minimal control. Yeah, because I've had professional jobs, so I couldn't go to work pissed. I'd just be that drinker in the evening, like a lot of people are now. That was, when you work in an office, you can't. Well, you can go in there pissed, but I mean, I've never really did that. But come that evening, you try driving past the off license on your way home and going, nope. And this is stuff I've had to develop. I had to say, right, how can I stop myself going to, right, repetition. Chris, you're not going to like it. Chris, it's going to cost you this. Chris, it's going to cost you this. Chris, it's going to do this. And through that process and a whole load of other stuff I won't go on about now, but I've developed the level of control where I very rarely drink now. When I do, it's 50% choice, it's 50% that little voice that goes, go on, it'll be all right. I'm just trying to be honest with people here.
Yeah, no, it is honest. That last bit's very honest as well. It's not always,
Do I enjoy it as much as I think? The first couple are nice. I'll say that. I normally go, I know the first couple, they're okay. Next morning, then you start like chasing the dragon, basically, and then it all becomes. By that stage, I'm thinking, and in case someone's wondering, well, Chris, why don't you just have the evening and stop? It's because I feel so shit in the morning that I've got a day of fucking work ahead. I've got to work. I've got people to speak to. I've got phone calls. I've got editing. My day is packed, and I've got my writing, right? I can't be feeling shit, because if I'm not like on some kind of buzz, it all just becomes too unfulfilling and hard. And
yeah, absolutely.
So I'll have that one in the morning, and then I'll crack on with my day. But now the voice is going, this has got to stop, Chris. This, and it does. And like I say, 3 days is I kind of wean myself off it, Tim, in that 3 day. So, that's my table laid out for you.
No, it's valid. I mean, and that's it. I think what's powerful, what you said there was, there still is that voice, although you're in a control of it. And I think that's what a lot of people would admit to, or, hopefully admit to, is that although we control it, there's a vulnerability about it, and it's different for different people. I never like drinking with people. I like drinking by myself, to be honest. I do a lot of reading, do a lot of writing. So I'm happy to sit somewhere and have a beer and do some writing, The writing's never as good, but it seems to come a lot easier. It seemed to, but it's never as good. I read back on some essays I wrote. I know exactly which ones I wrote when I wasn't drinking, which ones I wrote when I was. And now I've gone back and corrected all the ones that, you know, I wrote when I was drinking, because it just didn't flow as well, or the ideas were kind of all over the place, you know, that sort of thing. But for me, my dad was, so he comes from family, isn't it? My dad was a big beer guy and a big whiskey guy. And that's what he did when he came back from clearing up road accidents. He was a traffic officer. He was an armed response traffic officer. And he'd come back in the evenings. The first thing he'd do was crack his beer open, pour a whiskey, Daily Mail. That's what he'd do. And he'd sit there. It was his decompression, Chris. That's how he decompressed, from clearing up dead bodies on the roads, or, you know, going and telling someone that a loved one had died in a road accident. He'd decompress. Now, when you're growing up and you see that, as you said, a repetition, you see it all the time. That's just what you end up doing. That's what I end up doing. And that's what I ended up doing, is coming back from work. That's done now. The day's over. I can crack a tin open. Now get on my evening. And I did that for a very long time in the military. And I think a lot of people did that for a long time in the military. I didn't have a family. Family never got in the way. For a lot of these men, women, family did get in the way, and they never did. So they managed to wean it off. And now, for me, there's some places that, for example, I'm a big fan of German culture, and Berlin and Munich, and we go there quite a bit, and I like the German beer scene, and I like all that. So for me, by controlling this now, means that I can go and have a beer in the Tiergarten, and I can sit there in the summer, and that's fine. That's all right. So by stopping it completely takes a big part of life out, I feel. And it's just, I'm just trying to, this is what I tell people that I talk with as well, is you don't have to stop and relinquish that control element to alcohol. And then, and I won't mention names, but I've got people that I know, family members, that go to AA, and they teach in AA, and they spend more time in AA than they ever did drinking. So, and I say to them, well, hang on a second, you say you stopped drinking, but you're spending more time talking about drinking than you did when you were drinking. So really, who's in control of alcohol then? That's how I look at it.
I've actually done some work for AA as a professional now, we're talking about. I've never been to, I think I went to one AA meeting way back along. I knew it wasn't going to work before I went through the door. By the time I came out the door at the end of the evening, I definitely knew it wasn't going to work. No one's going to tell me I'm a broken machine. Absolutely not.
Well, that's it. Yeah.
You tell me I've got a disease, I just tell you to fuck off and get a life. Seriously.
Yeah.
It's alcoholism and addiction. It's a learned psychological condition. That's all it is. The rat in the cage, he knows if he pushes that button, he gets the food pellets. And what does he do? He pushes that button.
Yep.
You take the food away. What's the rat do? He still pushes the button. That if you can understand that little example, that's addiction. It's continuing to do the thing long after the thing really works for you. And it's because our brain is, as a human, as a primate, we're very programmed. The reward mechanism. We want rewards, and we don't want to do a lot for it. And alcohol is that perfect. Gives you a great reward because you feel mental, all your stress goes, and you can, bloody feel sociable, whatever it is. So going back to the AA thing, as much as that organization has professed to help people, I think they've also done just irreparable damage by not modernizing and by sticking to this, the old unscientific methodology and language that was used when people didn't have science, right?
And the book's the same, isn't it? They haven't changed the book.
It really is unhelpful that they've sold people on this word clean. Anyone that's gone through the NA program, I'm clean. I wish they could understand the damage that they're doing, the stigma they're creating for mental health by using such a horrible word to describe, I'm clean. What you're essentially saying, I was dirty.
Yeah, that's right.
Nothing dirty about mental health. Nothing. Most people will go through some sort of experience at some time in their life. And I challenge anyone to want to be called dirty because of it, right?
Yeah.
And so, in the end, the other thing is, you've said this thing that, once a problem, always a problem. Well, what about for those of us that have proved that
that's not,
Yeah,
that's right.
Irregardless of, like I say, I choose not to drink now. I just think my life's better.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I never will. I might, maybe next week I'll go and have a beer and I'll do that 3-day thing, or what. I might even
choose it. Yeah.
But do I want to be told that I've got absolutely no control and No, because it's not true.
What kind of life is that? Can you imagine living under that life where you're on a knife edge the whole time because you might have a drink and then your world's going to fall apart?
But I do understand, Tim. We also we must recognise. Sorry, I know I'm talking a lot on your podcast, but we also got to recognise. Yes, if you're at a stage where you're drinking yourself to death, and my two of my best friends now, I've watched them drink themselves to death. I've physically seen them go into hospital, seen their organs pack up, and kiss them goodbye. That's my two best friends, not people that I know, best friends, right? I get it. I wish they'd gone to AA.
Oh yeah.
I wish they'd gone and done that thing, because, they were dying. And when you've got that lack of control in your life, and you realize your family's suffering, your children are going to get abused, because by definition, addiction is abusing, it results in abuse, then I can understand why people get scared and they just do the first thing that comes to or the most pragmatic thing maybe is they go to one of these fellowships, right? I get that. I wouldn't stop anyone doing it. I just wish that they would update their language so it wasn't so stigmatizing for people experiencing mental health conditions. And I wish that they would understand that it's a learned psychological condition, and as such, it can be unlearned. It's hard to unlearn it, because as you get older and you've done this drink thing for 20 years or 30 years, the plasticity in your head allegedly can start to harden, and your neural pathways become more fixed. So it becomes hard to unlearn it, but it doesn't mean it can't be done, because, we're kind of, we're proof of that. And the fact that I might drink beer next year or next week, does that in any way ruin my life? No, it slows my work down. It might make me a bit of a dick to my partner and my child. Not to the point of being abusive, I like to think. What I'm trying to say is I love my life, Tim. I just love my life, and I think part of the reason I love my life is I've never gone to these extremes of putting rules on myself, especially if they're other people's rules.
Yeah, no, I do get that.
Sorry, mate, I don't even know if I'm making sense now.
No, I do get it. I brought in exercise because I think that's important. I think it's something we lack, and I was lacking it. When I look out, in the Marines, I guess, you get a lot of time to hit the gym, but in the Air Force, we never really did, because it's full on, it's a full on job. So it's always in your own time. And of course, when you finished, if you do 2 sorties a day, the last thing you want to do is go and throw yourself around a gym in the evening. It's just shattered. There's nothing left. It's like, you're lucky to be able to get home half the time. You know what I mean? It's like body's broken. So in the military, but it's quite a fast-paced life as well. So it's, the weight stays off because you're always moving around. You're doing like 20,000 steps a day. You're on the squadron, that kind of stuff. So you're fine. You come out, it becomes very sedentary. And when I came out the first year, I had an office job for 6 months on a contract, sitting there doing that. Nothing tangible coming out of that whatsoever, because it pays well, and you think this could be my life here, couldn't it? You put a bit of weight on, you're not eating healthy. I wasn't doing much exercise, living in hotels, beers in the evening, all that stuff. And I've started to change that now. And in the when I do coach people, we talk about bringing exercise in as like a non-negotiable. It's like this is what you're doing now. Every day you're doing something. You haven't got to get changed into your gym kit. Couldn't care less. But you are going to get those 10,000 steps done. Or you are. For me, I wake up. The first thing I do, I habit stack. Chris, I don't know whether you know this. James Clear on the internet, he does habits. He's got a book out about habits in America. he says to stack habits. So I never used to floss my teeth. And then I started going to a hygienist. She says, you've got great teeth. You need to kind of floss. So now, well, when do you floss? So now what I do is I put that in with, you always brush your teeth when you wake up. Everyone does that. Wake up, brush teeth. So now what I do is I wake up, floss, brush teeth, and then the exercise goes on the end of that. First thing I do is I get out into my garage. I've got a makeshift gym in there, and I'm doing either on the rowing machine. Where am I? Down here. There's a rowing machine there. It's a kilometre. It's a water rower. I'm a chairman of a rowing club for some reason. I don't know why I'd ever do that, but I am. So I, do 20 minutes on that, 20 minutes in the garage, and every single day I'm filling out a card, like an exercise card like that. 40 minutes daily exercise every day. I don't want to see any gaps there. This is what I tell people. No, you're going to have a card like this. You're going to fill it out. You're going to put a cross in the card. No gaps. No gaps. You can carry it on to another card if you want. You can do the same thing with drinking or not drinking for weeks. We can do this. All my clients do these things. We do them all together. And so what I say to my guys first is carry on drinking. Literally, drink for this long. Okay, I want you to carry on drinking for this long, but every day you're doing some exercise, and we can talk about what that exercise is. You can do whatever you want. One of my guys, he's very overweight. He wants to start running. He's going to bust his knees up. He starts running. He's like 260 pounds. So we're getting him to walk. He's doing the whole walking around the block, going exploring the local area first thing in the day, finding different parts he hasn't seen before. And he's going to do that. He's still drinking, and he's round about down here. And when we get to the end of this, he's been doing exercise every day. Well, strange enough, we then address the alcohol. So what we've done is we brought in healthy habits alongside the drinking. You start to feel better, don't you? You're eating the greens like you're talking about. You're getting the alkaline thing. You're bringing nutrients into your body, which you weren't doing before, because when we drink, we make really poor choices, as you said before. We eat bags of crisps in the evening. We're just, our diets are rubbish. We don't even look at our macros, horrible stuff. Now, we've got 7 weeks to address all that. We can have that conversation whilst you're drinking, and that's what we do. And it's great. It's a great conversation. Why? Because they're still drinking. They're not in that kind of, that whole status of, oh, what am I going to do? Because within 4 days of stopping drinking, it's out of your system. The rest of it's there. It's mental. There's nothing left in you, alcohol-wise. So how are we being affected by alcohol? And this is the conversation. Then we start talking about working through not abstinence-based recovery, but control-based recovery, where we just take it. We talk it through. And you know what? We carry on that exercise as well. And people get really into it, which I think is great. I think that's what people do.
God, I wonder if there's some room for some partnership work there, because I think I've got some like ideas as well that could really slot in with what you're doing. Perhaps we'll take that at a later date. But
yeah, by all means, more than happy. You want to have a look at that.
I do this thing with people when I'm life coaching, and say I get the paper, and what I get them to do is I say, right, if you don't change your behavior, I want you to write down 20 things it's going to cost you. So the list always comes out, it's always pretty much the same, right? So it's going to be like wealth, as in, keep drinking, it's going to cost me money, or if I don't do that skydive or whatever, bucket.
Yeah.
Wealth, family relationships suffer, lack of holidays a year. I live in a house that I don't want to live in. I'll have friends that I don't like, or they don't like, not really friends. You make this list. Then the next exercise, I get them to list here, what's your dream life? Oh, right, do a skydive, 2 holidays a year with a family, new car, whatever, even if it's cliche or whatever.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Smiling
every day, whatever, exercising. And then I introduce the cycle of change, which is the most powerful model of human behavior, I think, that's ever been written. It's by Prochaska and Dick Clementi. And they talk about how all change starts from pre-contemplation, and that's your, I haven't got a drink problem, I'm fine, I go to work, I work. Yeah, I drink 14 pints at night, but I work. So to go in, actually that 14 pints, that's probably not helping my life. And that's called the contemplation. Then there's the change. Then there's the maintenance of change. And then you deal with lapse or relapse, right? So lapse is like your odd beer. Relapse is going right back into the cycle of bad behavior. Very powerful model. But what I show people is that by coming to see me or to speak to me, you're not in pre-contemplation anymore. You realize your life needed to change.
Yeah.
You haven't just contemplated it, but you've taken action.
That's
Brilliant.
right.
You've come to speak to someone to change your, because you want to change your life. So go back to our paper. You're no longer in this in the shit list. You're moving your life to your dreams.
Yeah.
Already moving this direction. Brilliant. You're not here anymore. You're here. And then after we speak next week, you'll be here. And then you'll get here. And yeah, you might lapse, you might relapse and go back a bit, but you can never go all the way back to here or whichever side it was, because physically now you cannot go back. Once you understand change, you're not going to settle for second best. You're not going to go back to that shit life. You're going to keep for these goals. And all I'm telling them is what I've lived through, Tim, it's what I've lived through. I've made a list of my goals, or I don't think I've ever even written them down, but like roughly where would I like my life to be? Well, I want a happy family. I want a nice, a reasonable house. I'd like a bit of money, not a lot, but enough to pay the bills in the bank. I want to go to bed smiling and wake up smiling. I want to jump out of bed in the morning because I love what I do. I want a reasonable car to get me around. It doesn't have to be a Porsche or anything. I want to go running because I like running. I want to eat a healthy diet because that makes me feel good. And I want to have good, great relation. Well, my bit of paper that was there at one point in my life it's basically there. And so I think that really could fit in with what you're doing, that kind of philosophy,
Yeah, I mean, I use very similar potential action results belief. So I believe, people have the potential to change, right? This is where change comes along. But the hardest part of potential action results belief, it goes around in a circle. So you might say to me, I want to be lifting weights every morning. Fine. Well, you've got the potential to do that because, I can buy you some weights and you can lift them up. So we know you've got the potential. But the action part is the hardest bit to get to, because once you do action it and you go and lift weights every morning for a week, then you see the results of that. You're like, oh, and then you start believing. And from that belief, you find that you have more potential. You can lift more weights. You can do well. So it goes around a circle. But the hardest part to bridge is the potential to the action. This is why I don't like ideas, Chris. When people say, oh, I've got an idea for an app or something, I couldn't care less. Honestly, I've got an idea for a book. Don't care. I do care when you've written the first paragraph, by the way, but I don't care when you've got an idea. I've got to think about goals as well. I'm into habits. I believe you'll get your goals by the right habits. Whenever I've had goals in my life, I've never really got there because I haven't really put the right habits in place to get to the goal. I've just gone, I want to be doing this. In flying training, what's interesting is the goal is to end up as a frontline fast jet pilot. Makes sense. And this is the other thing I tell people as well. I want to join the military. I do say to them, you do realize you've got to kill people, yeah? It's not just a flying club here. You're going to be made into a weapon of conflict. That's the whole point. You are going to be someone who brings death to the battlefield in a really, really expeditious manner. A lot of death, by the way. That's the whole point of being a combat pilot. That's what you do. That is your SA-80. It's just a lot more powerful and it uses, we get that. In flying training, you go through different modules, different sections. So the idea of being a fast jet pilot doesn't work. You've got to put these habits in place. I've got to teach you to take off. And then I've got to teach you to land. And then I've got to teach you to fly circuits. And then I've got to teach you, see what I mean? And all these things end up being habits that are layered on until eventually you're a frontline fast jet pilot. You're worth a lot of money, about £7 million. It's taken about 7 years to train you. They're not going to pay you that much money, by the way, but you are an asset because you've built up by all these different things. And that's why I'm a big execution fan of all these things. Like, I'm going to get you doing exercise because you're doing something. And the thought of you stopping drinking or whatever it might be, well, that's just a thought until you started doing something. But like you're saying with your card and then moving from one side to the other, when people can see something tangible, they're more likely to come back and do it. And a lot of people, and I think this is the problem with AA, is people think, well, I've got an AA class on Wednesday, I'm just going to go and do that. Or on Friday, I've got another one. Or I go at the weekend. And one of my friends was on holiday, and she spent 4 nights of the holiday, 7-night holiday, 4 of the nights going to AA meetings in New York. So she's on holiday, and I mean, what kind of holiday is that? You know, she could have spent back. I mean, but as she said, well, I felt I was doing something. I could just go my idea was to always go to AA, and it all gets very woolly. So I'm a massive, tangible, action orientated, execution, not ideas kind of guy. And that's just how I kind of run this side of it. And I like what you're saying about that paper, how people can move left to right. But, you know, with potential, everyone has potential, don't they? You know, I've got potential to write 17 books, but I haven't even written out the titles. You know, I've done nothing towards them whatsoever. You know, that's the thing. That's how I feel about it.
Thanks for your openness of talking about alcohol, because it's not it's a big part of the problem. We're facing a veteran suicide epidemic at the moment.
Yeah, really are.
And you've got all these guys going, yeah, give me a call, come for coffee, and it makes a nice little Facebook post, right?
Oh,
but the truth is, if you're still that bigoted person that looks down on people for having mental health conditions, i.e. alcoholism, drug addiction, or all the other addictions out, then you ain't really much help and support to the military community. You're actually unhelpful, because I'm going to say these people that committed suicide obviously they didn't feel that they could reach out to you, you know?
Yeah, else they would have done, yeah.
And why didn't they feel that? Well, I'd say it's probably because there's a lot of bigotry that goes on in the military community.
It's a bigotry. I don't know whether that's the right word, Chris, but machoism, I don't know what it is, but I get pilots write to me, and I literally have to drag it out of them. You know, like, why have you written to me? Oh, I was interested in what you said when you wrote your essay about mental health. Oh, you're just interested, were you? You know, what is going on in your life? And eventually they're like, dude, my marriage is falling apart. I hate my job. I fucking feel suicidal. I've been measuring out beams in my garage with rope on them. I'm like, now we can have a conversation. This is a man that's struggling and is still unable to tell me what the problem is. I get angry with it, because that man could be swinging from a beam because he felt he couldn't write to me. He couldn't phone me up. He couldn't tell me. It's a friend of mine, for crying out loud. I was working down in Bristol, Chris, and we had a pilot down there kill himself. He was in a desk job in the Ministry of Defense. He'd been in North America flying these fighter jets out there that anyone would give the right arm to. One of the most talented pilots I've ever known. This guy was a test pilot. Just his wife went to work one morning. He went to the garage and hanged himself, you know, because he couldn't speak to anyone about it. You know? And it does upset me. It's like, what do you mean you couldn't speak to anyone? So no one ever knew. No note, nothing. He just felt I wrote an essay on it back in 2013, 2014, and the essay was called When Good Pilots Go Bad. And I wrote that title on purpose. It was clickbaity. I wanted people to say, oh, you can't say people with mental health are bad. I wanted people to say that because, of course, I didn't believe that. But I wanted people to read the essay. And that was about my own struggles with mental health conditions, me going to the military and saying, I'm not thinking straight here. I'm bordering on the suicide. This is ridiculous. I don't know what it is. I know what it is now because I went to see a psychiatrist, and they told me it was chronic stress. From 2011 was a really bad year. My father died, and Afghanistan, people were killed. Service inquiry into the Red Arrows. There was a horrible year that went on to 2013, 2014, eventually, 2012, 13, and 14, when eventually I went, another flight commander came to me and said, he said, I've been seeing a psychiatrist for the last year. I reckon maybe you need to go and see that guy. Someone reached out to me. Amazing. I did, went to see them. Over the next year, it got a lot better. You know, I'm not saying it's still completely gone away, but it got better. But the service still kept me flying. So I wrote an essay about, you know, having real issues with chronic stress and still flying fighter jets because the military doesn't pay enough attention to this. And I'm like, guys, this jet I'm flying costs £28 million. And all I want to do is talk it out with someone. And you're keeping me flying. You're not having the conversation, not only with me, you're not having a conversation. You're not having a conversation on a squadron. You're not having a conversation as an Air Force. You're not having a conversation about what you're doing to the mental health of all these young people that are coming in, working through a privatized system that is struggling. And you're keeping guys like me, you know, doing this where we are telling you everything's going to go wrong. Someone's going to have an accident. Eventually we shut the squadron down. I got 2 psychiatrists to come into the squadron. They shut it down for 6 months, and it allowed me to rebuild my instructor cadre to the point. The story's a bit longer, but you know what I mean. that helped me then progress my men and women through in the way I felt they should be. But I wrote, and still, I seem to be the only person out here. I mean, this is why it's great to speak to you, Chris. I mean, because you get it, but there's people that don't get it. And these people are just like us, and they could be doing more, and they don't do it. And I feel they are completely responsible for the, largely responsible for the way that some of these young people are coming out of the military and suffering with mental health issues. And we have this veteran epidemic that it's like we can't talk about it. Why can't we talk about it? We're just going to let these young people that came back from the battlefield without any legs sit in their flat. And you know what happens with these young soldiers that come back? Their mates are there for the first few years until the mates start getting families of their own. And then the mates don't come back anymore. And this young man or this young woman sits there in their flat on disability for the rest of their life. It's just horrendous. We don't talk about it, you know, until they kill themselves and become a statistic at all. You know, that's it.
Yeah, I say the bigoted thing, Tim, because, you know, the military is still under this really outdated, antiquated notion of macho-ness, that it's cool to drink. And yeah, we get it. When you're young, it's fun to drink and you go and bond with your buddies. You do some real stupid shit when you're drunk, and you have some amazing adventures when, you know, you go and run ashores and end up waking up in some strange bed in some strange place. And yeah, I mean, that I'm not knocking all the drinking per se, but it's this kind of, it's fine to go out and drink 12 pints and basically become, you know, have a problem with alcohol in that process, you know, it's okay to go and beat up a complete stranger in the taxi rank and put them in intensive care. You know, this is all the stuff that goes on in the military, right?
Yeah.
Oh, but don't you dare take a pill and go and dance for 12 hours and hug people and like actually enlighten yourself as to who you really are as a person, right?
But we don't want them to be enlightened. I mean, you don't want, if you had an enlightened military, you wouldn't have a military.
Yeah,
it wouldn't exist.
Yeah, you've got this thing where, it's kind of hard to discuss without really getting into one. But what I mean is, I think the military need to recognise some way. Well, they won't, because it's not, the military doesn't care about this is the irony. The military, as in like the MOD, they couldn't give a shit. The only reason they'd have any interest in the veteran, the suicide epidemic, is they know that it's not good for their recruiting statistics.
That's right. That's the only reason.
Only care they have. Other than that, once you leave the military, you're nothing.
That surprised me as well, actually, Chris. That surprised me, and I understand it in a way. Because else, what would the alternative? So I've called up RAF Valley. I've got a bungalow up there. We lived in a bungalow. It's near the beach. It's a nice little bungalow, and we go back there sometimes. And you know, I've got friends at Valley where I used to fly. I phoned up the. I'm an honorary mess member. I think if you stay in the Air Force a long time, they make you an honorary mess member, which is quite nice. So I can go to I have a cup of tea in the mess, you know, whatever. And I phoned the gym and I said, look, I'm a veteran here. I've done 20 years, 10 of them at Valley. I come up here, you know, every month or whatever, do a bit of writing, walk on the beach, a bit of exercise. Can I use your gym? And the girl on the phone was lovely. He says, oh, I don't know. I'll check with the senior gym person, you know, senior. This woman called me back and she said, no, absolutely not. She said, I said, but, you know, I said, I'm not going to take it. I said, it's one of the biggest gyms in the country. It was made when Prince William was up there, and they got the figures wrong. So it's an awesome. It's like a Royal Marines gym. You know, it's an awesome gym. No one's ever really in it because the population of Valley is quite small, and the squadrons have their own gyms anyway. So, you know, there's space. And I think I've still got a key fob for it anyway. That probably still works. But I was asking permission. You know what I mean? And she said no. She said, imagine if every veteran wanted to use their gym when they left. I'm like, oh, imagine if they did. Wouldn't that be great to keep veterans back into the community? I mean, can you imagine? I mean, how often would you seriously use a gym? I mean, you're down in Guz, aren't you? So you probably use Drake or something, wouldn't you? And go down there, maybe, but you don't want to be that tied to the military anyway. But you know what? When you're feeling low, you'd probably go down there and lift a few weights or go and run on the treadmill and surround yourself with other men and women and just feel a bit like you belong or you did belong to something. You just would. And it would go, that's enough for a couple of weeks just to stop me measuring up those frigging beams in the garage, thinking about killing myself again. You know, it would just be something where it would just help a little bit. And that's what I was saying. It's like, give me something here. I've just given you 20 years. I'm not asking for much. You know, let me run around your field with your little, you know, your assault course thing on it. There's one of those at Valley. Why can't I just do that? You know, why make it so hard? Why not say to veterans, yes, you can, or limit the time, or you know what, weekday mornings between 10 and 12, because the rest of it, we've got to, you know, how many veterans are really going to use that? What, 4 a week? Hardly any. Most people don't want to do it. But when I left, that didn't happen. There was no connection to the military whatsoever. And I although I get it, I just think it's a really wasted opportunity. And the Americans do this a lot better than us, Chris. They really do.
Well, there's that. It's the situation is where when you're in the military, you're not really an enlightened individual, because it doesn't lend it. That environment doesn't lend itself to you developing empathy, and empathy's obviously a very big factor. And you know, if you don't understand love for your humanity and love for yourself, you're never going to understand loving a veteran.
No, and also when people leave, you think, well, they've left. You know, they're not part of it anymore. I can see that, because when I was in, I felt the same when I knew pilots were leaving for the airlines. I was like, well, go then, fine. The rest of us will just do this. The rest of us will take care of it. I don't know whether you saw that in the Marines when people were leaving, or people do leave, and we're always going to be leaving too. You know, we are at some point. Everyone has to leave the military. But I still remember thinking about people when they left in a negative sense, not in a, go on, mate, go and do something amazing in Civvy Street. I always remember thinking it in a negative sense. There's, I've been thinking about this a lot, about conformity, Chris. I don't know whether you've ever thought about what it means to be conformist in a military structure, because I believe it's the opposite of creativity. So we can't create when we're conforming. And that makes a lot of sense, because someone that does create something, like you write books or you do YouTube or your podcast, you're creating something. You're putting yourself out there and you're exposing yourself to ridicule. And you are, I am as well, by speaking on your podcast right now. We're putting ourselves out. Our ideas are out there. People can rip them apart. If you're in a military context and you're in a squadron, I only know it from a squadron, you know, you can talk about a troop if you want to. And you're doing something other people aren't doing. What are you doing? You're putting yourself out now, aren't you? You're putting your head above the parapet. Someone can take a shot at you and say, what are you doing? Like, what do you mean you're writing a book? You know, how do you know how to write a book? You know, what do you know about writing? So we don't do it. So for 20 years, I didn't do anything creative. I don't know many people that played a musical instrument. I don't know many people that were in the drama club or sang or wrote anything. And when I started writing in 2011, 2012, I did it out of frustration at my command structure. I was like, you're not listening to what these people are telling you, so I'm going to tell the rest of the world instead. And you know, it was a horrible 5-6 years. It really was. You know, whenever I wrote something, I'd go to work the next day or on a Monday morning, and I know people would have read it. And I know people, especially on the squadron, the boss or the station commander, and the station commander would, he literally, before I even got in the squadron, he'd send me he'd phone me up or something, I'd send me a text and say, come to my office on the way to the squadron, you know. And he'd say, what do you know, when you write about mental health, Tim, when you write about mental health, you're telling people that you're flying a jet and you're not mentally sound. And I'm like, yes, I am saying that to the station commander, loud and clear. I'm about to go fly in about 2 hours' time in an airplane, and I'm struggling. And people in my team are struggling. And we're telling you every day we're struggling, and I'm still doing it, and these men are still flying, and there is nothing you're doing about it. And I have spoken to the doctors. In fact, one of the docs was great at Valley. When we had every year you have a medical, it's a pretty intense medical, you know, as a fast jet pilot. And one of the doctors was a really old boy, and he used to say, how much are you drinking? And we used to go, 3 or 4 beers a night. He went, all right, so what about 8 to 10 pints a night then, really? We go, probably. He goes, good, don't stop doing that. Because he recognized the balance between alcohol and mental health in high performance environments. And as far as, he died now, he's dead, but as far as he was concerned, without that decompression in the bar, he used to say, are you going to the bar? Do you go to the bar in the evening? Yeah, I normally stop off for a pint on the way home, chat to the guys. Fine, you're fine then. You're all right. If you're not doing that, he starts worrying about you. That's because he's old school, Chris. You know, he knows how it works. If you're going to put people in these airplanes and fly them close to the ground the whole time, they're going to walk away with some mental health issues, and they're going to need to decompress those things. And that's what the bar was there for. That's what the decompression was there. And when my father left the police force, I don't know if you know much about the police service. They used to have police clubs associated with police stations. Yeah, you're aware of that.
I say that because it was the prison officers had the same thing, didn't they?
Oh,
The prison bar.
Yeah, prison bar. So above the police club in Cosham, my father was a traffic officer in Cosham down in Portsmouth. And above that was called a police club. He used to sing in the Hampshire Male Voice Choir, police choir. He used to sing there. And when I was a kid, he'd be singing. I'd have his pint there. I was about 7. I'd be dipping my crisps in his pint. You know, all that old memories we have. But they shut those bars because they couldn't condone drinking for the police service. They shut them. And what happened to the mental health of the police officers? It went through the roof. The mental health issues went through the roof. All of them, because they finished cleaning up one of my father. He came back, and it was obviously a really bad day, and he used to draw the accidents on tracing paper. That was his job, and then he'd present to a court. You know, he was an accident investigator, police traffic officer in the police car's arm response. And I remember seeing this big tracing thing he'd drawn, and there were loads of bodies, car, and it was a French family that had been decapitated on the M27. Their car had gone underneath a jackknife lorry. All the family, 2 kids, 2 parents, decapitated, bodies ripped apart, and he'd drawn an arm, and he'd drawn it where the head had ended up on a kid. He cleaned that up. He'd come home and he'd drawn that plan of an evening whilst he's got his whiskey and his beer, and then he'd gone to work the next day and he'd done exactly, the same thing. You can't. No wonder he ended up with PTSD, because he did after years of being in 37 years in the police service. He left the police service, died about 4 years later. So that's why they had police clubs. He could come back from that. He could go upstairs, get himself smashed, and some police car coming on shift would have driven him home. That's what they used to do. And now, of course, that didn't happen because they shut the police clubs. He'd come home, be doing this, drinking, wife would have a go at his drinking. He'd be, argument would happen, divorce, all that kind of stuff will come out of it. And I'm not condoning drinking, but I am condoning the facilitation of proper mental health care within these services. That's what I'm trying to get across. Just don't see it there.
Tim, listen, this has been an amazing conversation. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me on, Chris. I do appreciate it.
As I say to many of my guests, I look forward to picking this up in whatever framework we can use next time. Maybe it might be to come on one of my live shows and just answer people's questions, because I mean, when do you get the chance to ask a fast jet pilot about what it's like to fly jets? It's so
we haven't really done that as well, have we? That's the thing. We've talked about situations around that, which I think is almost more important than talking about, how do you plan for a sortie and this sort of stuff. I mean, I'll bring you onto my channel, and then we can go deep diving into, your experiences as a Royal in the Corps. I'd be very interested in that, because it probably aligns very much to like my father's experiences back in the day, and so that'd be quite valuable, I think. But yeah, anytime you want to, go over stuff, let me know. And I'll
in that case, let's close off with talking about flying fast jets. I mean, I'd like to just talk to you for hours and hours and hours about that in itself. I've been watching some of your cockpit videos, and just the sensation of rolling around the countryside and the speed you must be going at. I mean, what's it like to fly a jet?
Not much that's actually happening in the cockpit, if that makes sense. So everything dynamic when you see an aircraft fly, we're moving across the countryside at about 7 miles a minute. So in a car, you're doing 1 mile a minute, aren't you? 60 miles an hour. So we're doing about 500 miles an hour. And that's a standard speed that we fly at in the low level environment. And the height we fly at is the height of those electricity pylons that you see. It's about 250 feet is the height we tend to fly. We can fly down to 100 feet. The cockpit, the flying is all about the future. That's what I tell people. And what I mean by that is, whatever you're planning on doing now in this particular moment has gone. In fact, every 6-7 seconds, it's a mile behind you by definition. It's over. So a lot of what the work we do in the cockpit is approximating and refining that, especially the maths. There's a lot of mental maths going on. We measure everything in time, not distance, because it doesn't matter what speed you're flying at then. So if I'm 2 minutes away from the airfield, well, I'm 2 minutes away, whether I'm flying 700 miles an hour, whether I'm flying 50, I'm still 2 minutes. If I start talking in miles, then I have to put another factor in about my speed. But when we talked earlier about management of airline cockpits, a lot of it is about that. It's mission management stuff. So everything you're doing this is why pilots sometimes suffer from anxiety, because we're basing our life around what ifs, like what if this happens? Like you would have done when you were flying. Like, what if you get airborne in your Cessna 172 and the engine fails at 400 feet? You've planned for that in your pre-brief. You've gone, well, I'm going to go left for that field, or I'll land ahead on the runway, or I'm going to land, a pilot's life is about that. It doesn't stop when you leave the military, by the way. And when you start living in the future, you live an anxious life, which is the work I do with myself and other people now to help them suppress that. But it's all about planning. It's all done before the trip. Nothing you do in the aeroplane is left to chance. None of it is random or sporadic. If you see an aircraft flying around at low level, he is a fast jet. It's probably going on an attack run at some point. So it's where they're going is all being planned out. The target is being planned out. It's taking 3 hours to do that whole plan. It's going to take 2 hours or an hour and a half to debrief it when you get back as well. But it's a very calm environment in the cockpit, Chris. And when I did Red Flag in America, one thing that's a very big American exercise, full of combat jets and helicopters and multi-engine airplanes all working together. It's supposed to be the busiest war you ever go in, but it's in America. You're practicing for war. One thing that came across clear to us as a Tornado Squadron was the quieter the cockpit, i.e. the less communication between the front and the back seater in the cockpit, the more successful the mission outcome was going to be. So therefore, you start automating routines and you start trusting the person to do something at the right time. And there's so much radio going on now. I mean, listen to these young soldiers. They've got radios going on as well. But in a cockpit, you've got a strike primary frequency. You've got another combat frequency coming in here. You've got the navigator talking. You've got your own frequency between aircraft you're working with. It's a busy time. You're listening to 2, 3, 4 frequencies at once. So the whole point is to take that information and make it usable. What I would say is to pass the information. So you take the data, pass it into something. And so a lot of the flying is about managing all those external influences. And as long as you can manage them, a lot of it, as I said, is done in planning, then you'll have a successful trip. The reason people die in airplanes is when they do something that has not been planned for. And that's normally caused by a failure of sorts that they haven't predicted, and the failure becomes worsened by their actions, and then to the point where it's unsustainable, and then they crash. So everything we do is to plan and to minimize every eventuality like that, which unfortunately makes my marriage not the best, because I plan everything out. My wife says, should we go to Cheltenham shopping? I'm like, what if the pandemic is right? What if we walk, and it's like, oh, just go and do it. Live in the now, and your life is so much happier. But yeah, it's a sweaty place as well, Chris. There's a lot of stuff we're wearing. It's quite claustrophobic in there as well. And
what's the sensation? When you drive a car and you get a chance to drive it fast, it's generally pretty good fun. I'm assuming it's I've only flown in an aeroplane, obviously. It's pretty much got one speed. Once you get up to altitude, yeah, you can dive it a bit, or not that I ever really did that. I was kind of quite just happy to get up and down safely.
Yeah.
But you're in a machine that can fly, faster than the sound barrier. Am I right in?
Yeah, you can. We don't. The Typhoons do if they need to, but it tends to be very fuel heavy. It tends to burn a lot of fuel, and you only carry so much fuel. The Tornado we never did. The F3 did, but the ground attack variant didn't fly above the speed of sound. About 600 knots was the fastest that we'd probably go. So about 0.87 of the speed of sound, I think, or 0.93, I think, was the limit of so almost speed of sound. But yeah, so when there's different levels of flying. So if you take the most basic, we're probably looking at gliding or something, aren't we? Or light aircraft flying, going A to B. And then the most dynamic I felt ever, I think US naval aviators would talk about night landings on carriers as being, I think most pilots would agree with that. I think the other thing that I would say was very challenging from my point of view was night vision goggles at low level in the Scottish valleys. So at night, poor weather, trying to be shot down by other aircraft. It's all training, but you're in these valleys everything's green. You've worn MVGs before, and now you're in this aircraft at 250 feet doing 9 miles a minute on an attack run. That's 540 knots. I might have to refine that maths, but that's your attack run speed. I mean, that's fast. If things hit if a bat hits your airplane at that speed, things are going to fall off. That is fast. The Tornado luckily was a bit of a brute, and things normally bounced off it and you just dusted off. Our engineers were very good like that, you know what I mean? But there's no mistake, there's no margin for error. And when you're doing it and it's snowing as well, and there's snow on the mountains, and you can put the terrain following radar in for the aircraft, but that's a whole procedure. So you don't want to get that wrong, because then you think the aircraft's flying itself and it's not. So normally you're manually flying and you're looking out, trying to avoid things. For me, those were the most challenging sorties I'd ever been in ever. And you're still working. I tell people in the airplane, you don't get much chance to look out at these things. It's a job. Flying, it's a job. Being a combat pilot is a job, and they pay you money. Not a great deal of money. I think I left I was nudging 70 grand when I left, which is not bad money, but don't get me wrong. The time you spend at work, it's full on. I was chatting to an F-18 pilot from the US, from Australia recently, and I said, "Are you going to go back and fly?" And he said, "No." He said, "The problem with being a fast jet pilot is you can't do anything else with your life." We've spoken about this now, Chris. It's like, I enjoy doing this. I enjoy, being a combat pilot, no time for anything else. No time for thinking about anything else, really. And in the cockpit, it's full on work. And I've got videos on my channel you can watch, and you can see the work is being done. It's a very hostile work environment. It just happens to be quite dangerous as well, and it takes a lot of control. And that's why these people take a lot of training. But yes, I tell you, a lot of the times I didn't want to fly. It'll be like, I used to go into work sometimes going, I hope the wind's all across the runway and we don't have to fly today, because I'm either knackered or the flights I've got are really challenging, hard trips that I've got to do a lot of work for. And it's going to be very easy to make a mistake on them. And that's going to highlight me to my peers. There's a lot of things to remember. There's a lot of procedures that you need to be coming up routinely with. From memory, the check cards don't always come out. You start the jet and you shut it down without any cards on you. The flight reference cards, they're just in a pocket. Everything else, jet flying is all done from memory. It's all routine. You get the cards out when you have an emergency. So yeah, it's busy. It's busy in the cockpit, and it's a full-on job, and that's why they pay to do it. And when people write to me saying, "I do the job for free," I'm like, I used to think that as well when I was 14. I don't think that anymore. They probably couldn't pay me enough to go back and do it again. They might be able to. We'll see. But yeah.
Did you ever have to land on a carrier?
No, I didn't. No, I never did. I'm trying to think. Well, the F-35 guys are doing carrier ops now. So some of the young students I trained on it, they go on F-35. They're starting to go on a carrier. I mean, it's one of those really weird things, though, Chris. I don't know whether you still read the Globe and Laurel or get Navy News or anything. When you see pictures of the carrier and F-35s landing on it, the picture looks great. That's F-35. Man, it must be so cool to land an F-35 on a carrier. I know those F-35 pilots. I know the work they put in to get there. I know the work they're doing at the moment to just be there. I know the struggles with the families they're having as well, because all of a sudden they've got young families invariably, because it's taken so long to get them through flying training. The F-35s are busy squadrons to be on. There's not many pilots on them right now. They're doing all the work. They're working up a new aircraft. It's like you in the Marines. It's if you change corps or you go and do a mountain warfare course, you've got to do a lot of work. So it's not as romantic as the picture shows. The picture looks a lot better than that. I'm not, by the way, when people write to me saying I want to be a fast jet pilot, I want to be a helicopter pilot, crack on. It's a great career. I'd do it again tomorrow. Honestly, I would. I would change a lot, but what I'm saying is I would still go and do it. And I think the Navy is a great place to be, as I do think the Air Force is a good place to be as well. But it's never that. It's like owning that Lamborghini Countach you had the picture of. It's never going to be as romantic as you think it is. Those services are going to cost you a fortune. You know what I mean? And no one's going to let you out in traffic. No one's going to let you out in traffic. So, yeah. It's more romantic than you think it is. And it is a hard job to do, but that's part of the reward, isn't it?
Tell us then about weapons training. How is that actually done?
So as you're a student, you get trained in weapons. So you get trained on what's called 4 Squadron now. I've got a picture over there, I think, of a 4 Squadron Hawk. That's a Hawk T2 from 4 Squadron. It's not that clear, sorry. It's a black Hawk. You can put up a picture of a Hawk later if you want, but we'll have a look at the videos. So the weapons training is all done synthetically in your training, which means there's no live drop element to it. The Hawk can drop live weapons. We choose not to in the Air Force. So all the things to do with air combat and ground attack are separate. So you do ground attack phase, and then you do an air combat phase. You do a radar missile phase as well. And so you learn all these things as you go through. And then when you get onto the front line, of course, you're learning about new weapons and this kind of thing. And the Tornado had a lot. Tornado had a lot of weapons to learn. And I was an electronic warfare instructor. So my role on the squadron was to protect them from being shot down by enemy surface-to-air missiles. So I learned a lot about all the surface-to-air missiles and things that could shoot us down. Basically, that was my thing. Fascinated by surface-to-air missiles, actually. The technologies are just immense. But we had on the Tornado, we had paveway bombs, which are laser guided or GPS guided. We had the gun, 27mm Mauser cannon. We had Brimstone on there. We had all the free fall, and we had the retard munitions also. We had, I think Azram was coming in when I left. I probably missed. We had Alarm, which is air-launched anti-radiation missile. Every one of those weapons, then you do a little phase in. And most of them you're never going to get to drop. There was an island called Garvey up north of Scotland, and we used to bomb that a lot. And you go to other places. So it's an island in the middle of the sea, off near Shetlands, and you go and drop retard or freefall weapons onto that, which is all quite good fun. Things go bang. But if you want to drop guided munitions, you tend to have to go to the States to do that. And there's big air weapons ranges down in Tucson. So every year a squadron would be going out there, and you could guest on a squadron. So if you were new onto a squadron that had been recently, and another squadron were going, we'd send a young pilot or a young navigator to that squadron. They go to the States. We had about 10 jets that lived in the States permanently, 10 Tornadoes. They live permanently for the year, but they come out and they go back in every year to be flying across the Atlantic. And you just go and learn to do bombs out there, and you just bomb the ranges. And hopefully you won't get it wrong, because if you do get it wrong, people die often. And one of the sad things about those ranges, there were packing crates you'd bomb. And very often the packing crates, immigrants coming from Mexico would sleep in them overnight whilst they're making their way into the States. And so in the morning, a range officer should go out and check that everything was clear. But of course, invariably, I have heard stories of, people being bombed and things like this. I mean, the ranges are vast though, because I mean, the airspace America has, huge. We just don't have anything like that.
And let's just finish up then, Tim, on what near misses did you have? I bet you probably had a few over the years. So can you tell us some memorable things, or was there actually anything you cocked up and got away with or didn't get away with?
Yeah, of course, Cam. Yeah, almost killed myself many, many, many times. There is this thing saying that you start out with a barrel, with a bucket of luck and a bucket of experience, and the key is to empty the bucket of luck into try and fill your experience bucket before the bucket luck empties. And normally pilots, they die around about 700 flight hours in, because that's the point at which your ego is quite big but your experience is quite low. I ended up with about 2,500 flight hours. I can't remember now, but around about 700. That's kind of like towards the end of a first tour. So you've done your flying training, you've done maybe 3 years on a frontline squadron, and you've been given some qualifications, and and you do something wrong. It's fine. You do something wrong. You push a kind of boundary a little bit and you do something wrong. For me, I surged a Hawk once by grossly over controlling it with rudder, which destabilized the airflow into the intake, which then reversed the flow around the compressor and surged. And it was a locked in surge in a Hawk on the Adore 151 engine. And that surged and that locked in. I had to shut that down. And I was at about 20,000 feet at the time. So I had a bit of time, before I died. So I shut the engine down. Aircraft was gliding. They do glide. The Hawks glide reasonably well, actually. Tornadoes don't. Typhoons don't. Most aircraft won't fly without the computer systems keeping them flying. The Hawk doesn't have any computer systems to keep it flying. So you can shut the aircraft down completely. As long as the little ram air turbine comes out the back to give you some hydraulic pressure, then you can glide that aircraft back quite happily. So I shut that engine down, went through the checks I needed to do, and I relit the engine, and I managed to get that one back. That was me being an idiot. I've hit birds before. lots of birds. But actually, I've been quite lucky. I only went for the ejection handle twice. I never had to pull it. I know many people have ejected. I know people that have ejected and been killed on ejection. The ejection seat won't save you in all conditions. And the snowbird incident, the Royal Canadian Air Force recently lost one of their display aircraft, and they both ejected, but the ejection seat was so poor. And why that's still being used, I know why it's being used, because no one's ever going to change it in an aircraft that old. But either way, one of the people in the aircraft was killed on ejection. So that does happen. But most accidents happen, like most car accidents, happen within a mile of your house. And there's many reasons for that. It's because most people drive within a mile of their house. And when you're coming back, when you're going in the morning, you've switched off, haven't you? You're going to work. When you're coming back in the evening, you've switched off from, as you come back home. So you have an accident. In the same way, most accidents happen in aircraft on takeoff or landing. And most of my incidents I had were on takeoff or landing. But luckily, I didn't ever eject. And I know one of them, if I had have ejected, I would have been killed on it. And I think I've got a video, not about that, but there's a video about when the engine stops. And it's to do with forced landing the aircraft. It's a different profile. And on one of those forced landings, when we're simulating the engine's failed and we're coming down quite steeply, 15 degrees, to keep the airspeed, and one of my students did call for an ejection. And if he had ejected at that point, we would have both been killed. Because below 800 feet, with the profile we're flying, the ejection seat, they'll come out, the parachutes will start opening, but the rate of descent is too great to slow you down. And that was my fault for not telling him that the picture he's going to see is going to look a little bit different to what he expects on a normal landing. So, I learned about flying from that. So from then on, I'd always tell my instructors, if you're going to practice one of these with a student in the aircraft, make sure you tell them that the picture they're going to see doesn't look like a normal picture they're going to see when they're landing their airplane. It's a little bit steeper, and that will stop you from being killed. But I think half it's luck, Chris, and half it is, as I said, filling that experience bucket before that luck runs out.
And and you've obviously had that luck for us to be having this conversation now, which is that's obviously a very good thing. And you mentioned a Red Arrows pilot fatality. Yeah.
So I it's really hard how you look at this. You could say that it was an opportunity I was given, or you could say that actually it changed me in some way that won't ever be undone. And that's fine, because things do change us. And things do change us. Life is like that, right? Life is this fine balance we try and create for ourselves, don't we? And we take these knocks, and it does move us. And then maybe if we're lucky, we get to move back into a more central position. That's all that life is. It's never going to go to the plan. But in 2011, unfortunately, there was a Red Arrows crash in Bournemouth. A friend of mine called John Eggins was killed. He was a young pilot, about a bit younger than me, actually. And the inquiry took about 8 months. In fairness, it took about 5 months of me being with the other two members of the team. They pick a Hawk expert normally, then they pick a senior officer, and they pick an engineer, and they go all tri-service. It just so happens that 2 of us were in the Air Force, and the engineer was an Army engineer, lovely guy, really nice guy actually. So he did all the engineering work. The senior guy kept everything together, and I did all the operational stuff about, I know how to fly a Hawk. John was flying a Hawk. And you sit down, you talk to the Red Arrows, and unfortunately the Reds weren't in a great place at the time as a team, a very fragmented team. And 7 weeks later, we'd started the inquiry. 7 weeks later, we'd interviewed the team. 7 weeks later, we were back up to the Red Arrows to interview the pilots and get them to sign. And they're all friends of mine, crying out loud. And unfortunately, another pilot was killed that day as well. A guy called Sean Cunningham was a friend of mine. And as he crewed into his airplane, I believe it was November the 7th. It might be in the 8th. I can't remember now. But he did his control checks, which inadvertently fired the ejection seat from the way the seat had been the way the pin had been put into the seat. Unfortunately, you could make a mistake back then. The whole thing was an error. Fired him out, and unfortunately, the seat had been serviced incorrectly, and the parachute never came out of the seat. He was killed, and we were there for that. And that kind of, and that was an investigation. I did the first one. So a Navy guy came on and did Sean's one, the second one, and we did the first one because that's what we were doing. And unfortunately, John was found to have been unconscious on the break as he came in. The Red Arrows come in and they all do this great, very display break, and it was a bit faster than normal. Not that was a massive issue, but he just unfortunately went unconscious and the aircraft crashed and he was killed. And so we put this report together, and that report led into a lot of changes within the team. Now, up until 2018, I didn't feel there'd be much change within the team. I don't really talk about the team too much anymore. There are some people that were on the team back in those days that really have an issue with me, and that's fine because I think I made them safer, and I'm happy to be the guy that's not liked as long as they're able to go home in the evening. That's fine by me, you know what I mean?
What's their issue? What did you do?
So at the time, there was significant practices in the engineering side. People were oversigning engineering. No one knew who'd serviced Sean's ejection seat, and obviously done it incorrectly, unfortunately, or outside of the procedures, because they were oversigning it. So there were bad engineering practices at the time. There were a lot of things the Reds were doing that other squadrons in the Air Force weren't doing because it was felt to be unsafe. And what happens, for example, Chris, you understand this, if you were to go and lead an investigation into the Special Boat Service, because you're not in the SBS, for example. So they say, look, you're not in the SBS, so you're a fresh pair of eyes. So I want you to go and look at this fatality. The SBS have lost a couple of guys in training, and because you're not in the SBS, I want you to go and look at it. What's going to happen to you? They're going to say things like, well, you can't know what we do because you're not in the SBS. You're going to have to get over those kind of hurdles. You're going to have to understand the procedures that the SBS employ and how they're different to being a regular Marine. And so we were faced with a bit of that. A bit of the team. It's very hard to understand what the team do because no one else do what the team does. Also, the team have been given a clean bill of health by people that are coming to assess the team. Squadrons are assessed every year by an independent team. And so by doing that, the team felt that what they were doing was correct. And actually the work they'd done on a lot of the things, a lot of the maneuvers they'd done was sound. They'd risk assessed all the maneuvers they do, or when they come together and they do the loops all together, they'd risk assessed it. What they hadn't risk assessed was any of the ways they land the aeroplanes, and they land the aeroplanes in different ways. Sometimes it's they come into the airfield and they loop and then they all break out and then they come and land. Sometimes they come in, unfortunately this is how John was killed, and they come in as a 9 and they break out and they pull lots of G and they come and land. The argument that we had as a service inquiry was that these are display maneuvers. They should have risk assessments attached to them so that you know whether you're supposed to do them or not. This is what risk assessments are for. I mean, how likely are you to crash one of these aircraft? They felt that they weren't display maneuvers. The service inquiry I was on, the board, the panel, felt they were. And the reason that we were assured they were, and the reason that they're now risk assessed on the team, was because no other squadron in the Royal Air Force did that. No one else did those maneuvers when they came into land. So because of that, they are part of the display. Else, why would you do them? You just come in individually. You just do 9 aircraft in a long line. But no, you come in with smoke on for this big looping break because it's part of your display, and therefore it should be display maneuvers. Unfortunately, a lot of change had to happen within the team. It did happen within the team. It probably put a few noses out of joint, to be honest with you, and they didn't help themselves with having the fatality of Sean Cunningham. And then later on, when Dave Stark was flying, Dave Stark was a friend of mine. He flew an aircraft, RAF Valley, a Red Arrow, and he did a maneuver, which having done the research into it, I felt that the team hadn't given him enough opportunity to practice. It was an engine failure after takeoff, but unfortunately he crashed his airplane at RAF Valley, and the engineer in the back died. So again, I commented on that on one of my videos. And for me, it's not good enough, Chris. We can say, yeah, they're the Red Arrows. They're always in the Daily Mail. Bright red airplanes. They're brilliant. I don't care. Keep killing people. Stop killing people. And then you won't have people coming doing investigations. And people do have a go at me, and I'll take every one of those spears. I'd rather say it and keep people alive than not say it and then be that guy that has to write an email to a widow or a letter to a widow saying, yeah, I knew your husband. He was a great pilot. I'm sorry that he died. Yeah. So I'm the anti-Red Arrow guy for some reason. I'm not, because they're all friends of mine. I all know them. Occasionally a guy will get upset like he did last week, write me an angry email and then block me. And, you know, I've got to remove him from Fast Jet Performance because he's writing nasty things on there. And that's going to happen for anyone like you or I that puts out content. People are going to find issues with it. And if that's the case, well, let's turn our cameras off and go home and let's not do this. But I'd rather be that guy that gives some kind of positive message out there and have the odd guy not like me very much. And that's what we did with the Red Arrows, unfortunately. And they're a better team now because of it. So
Good. So on that subject, do you want to give a shout out to your websites and your Twitter and I'll put the links below the video.
I want to give a shout out to what you're doing. I think what you're doing is amazing. I think more people. I can see what's going to happen with you. You're just going to grow into this thing, and people are just going to leap on and follow you. And you, yeah, exactly. And they're going to go, oh,
likewise, hopefully.
Yeah, and I'll be like, oh, I used to know Chris once, and then he got really famous. So I have a Facebook page called Fast Yet Performance. And Fast Yet Performance, there's real two kind of groups I talk about, which is the guys in their 40s and 50s. And I also talk about guys in their guys and girls, in the late teens through to the early 30s. That's most of my audience. And what we talk about is, we do a lot of talking about mental health actually, but we talk about performance. We talk about tangible performance and how to really understand what that means in the work context. So that's, there's a YouTube channel. I talk about that on my YouTube channel, Fast Yet Performance. So go and subscribe there if you want to. You'll see loads of stuff. And if you're a young person thinking of joining the military or just thinking of going out into the workspace in general, there's a lot of stuff in there about that, about, you know, what it means to go and find a job and what you need to do for it. And a video I did recently was about how to prepare. It was a Facebook live, it was a YouTube live. A guy wrote me an email, want to join the Air Force, and he had some issues. And so I explained it on the YouTube live. So there's Facebook, there's that. I'm not a massive Twitter fan. I don't know whether you do Twitter too, Chris.
I don't. I've got an account, but I very rarely do.
Yeah, if I want to feel really sad, I do Twitter.
What I found is I've been guilty in the past of just kind of like using a shotgun approach to social media.
Yeah, same.
What I've learned is they're very idiosyncratic is probably maybe the word. You have to use a different approach for each one.
You do. Yeah, you can't just copy and paste content, can you? It doesn't work.
No, it doesn't. And for example, I used to wonder why I could put something, say, on Instagram, and I'm not big on any of it, but you've kind of got to try and be in this job. I could put something on Instagram and get like 100 likes or whatever, or shares, and put the same thing on Twitter and not even...
Yeah, none.
I've got 80,000 people on Twitter, not get a single retweet, right? And then I realized what it is. It's people follow you on your different platforms for different reasons, and you need to meet their needs and their wants from you. So yeah, that's an interesting thing again.
So all the blog articles and everything I write is on fastyetperformance.com, which is the website, and that's where I do all the coaching from and everything else. But the YouTube channel, you've got some flying videos on there, some stuff where I talk to individuals like yourself, and some other just life advice really from a guy that's kind of been there and messed it up in several ways. And then Facebook is where the conversation tends to happen. And I don't tend to do Instagram. I don't tend to do Twitter. Really, I'm not big into those spheres. I don't tend to engage with people who don't want to give me their name. How's that sound? So if you're on Twitter and you're like Big Dog 44 and we're having an argument, you're not going to argue with me very long because you know my name because it's written all over it. It's written as Tim Davies. That's who I am on Twitter. I'm Tim Davies. If you're coming at me as, She-Wolf 17, I don't care. Your opinion means nothing to me because I don't know who you are. And that's another interesting thing about people that are using Twitter from within the military structure that are not having their own names on there. I'm not interested in engaging with those people. I've got the Chief of Air Staff, Mike Wigston. His name's on Twitter as Mike Wigston. I know who I'm speaking to, but yet I'm speaking to some young army officer who says I'm in the army and he's called, I don't know, Daddy Bear 4 or something. Who is that, Chris? Who am I speaking to? And he's like, well, I don't want to give my identity away. Well, don't use Twitter then, you fool, because I'm not going to speak to you, am I? You know what I mean? It's like, so, and by the way, and I say that with authority, when in 2011, when I started writing, I wrote as me from day one. I didn't put anything, but I didn't hide at all. I put it out and I took the spears on a daily basis from friends, from instructors I was working with, everything. I put it out there. And you know why I put it out there, Chris? Because now it's easy to take that. And I know no one's coming out of the military doing what I do because they don't want to take as much punishment as I went through. And I would never wish it on my worst enemy. But it's hard. It's hard, right? It's not nice when people say nasty things against you, especially when they're your mates. So, yeah, I did it to toughen myself up. And that's why I've always used my own name. I never hide away from anything.
Yeah, good man. Well, Tim, thank you ever so much for your story, your experiences, your moreover your humanity, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
Oh, it's great. I really appreciate it. Anything else I can do for you, let me know.
Brilliant. Stay on the line while I say my goodbyes. So our friends at home, huge thanks as always for watching the Bought the T-Shirt podcast. If you could like and subscribe, I'd appreciate it. Likewise, if you consider supporting us on Patreon. And big love to you and your families. See you next time. Thank you. Hello, friend. I hope this finds you well. My name's Chris THRALL. I'm a former Royal Marines Commando, and I fought my way back from chronic trauma and addiction to live, work and travel in 80 countries across all 7 continents, achieving all of my dreams and goals along the way. Now I pass my simple system on to other people, but I can only help you if you like and subscribe. So please do so, because you get one life, and if you live it right, one is enough.